Hey guys, part 2 is ready. I hope you'll like it, and let me know what you think in the comments. Enjoy, Blood That Binds. Chapter 11, The Eighth. The Eighth arrived without warning, which was how most of them arrived, but this one was different in a way that Izuku registered before he fully understood why. It was Friday evening, 4 days after the rain had stopped, the day before Dr. Sato was due back. Izuku was on the third floor working through the case file access that All Might had arranged, 12 manila folders delivered by hand that morning by a former sidekick named Takahashi who had asked no questions and accepted Izuku's thanks with the brief nod of a person who understood that some work happened outside the documented record. The files covered a 17-year window, and Izuku had been moving through them with the focused intensity he brought to research that mattered, tabbing pages, cross-referencing, building a picture that was larger and older and more organized than he had allowed himself to fully imagine. He heard the front door. Not a knock. Not the bell he had installed in the second week. The door itself, the specific sound of its hinges under pressure that was not quite the pressure of a human hand. He was down the stairs in 6 seconds. The ground floor was already in motion, Haru on his feet, Takeshi up from the floor where he had been sitting, Rei risen from her position near the wall with the quality of someone who had been alert before the sound had fully finished. Nami was already at the interior door to the entryway. "Wait," Izuku said. Everyone stilled. He moved to the entryway door himself and opened it. The girl on the other side of the front door was perhaps 14 years old. She was standing with her back against the door and her arms wrapped around herself, and she was looking at Izuku with eyes that were the luminescent wrong but were also, underneath that, something he had not seen in the eyes of any of the others. Not fear. Not confusion. Not the disoriented blankness of the newly transformed still catching up to what had happened to them. Calculation. She was calculating him. Reading him, rapidly and thoroughly, in the way that Daichi read people but faster, faster than anything Izuku had seen from the others, faster than should have been possible for someone who appeared to have been standing on his doorstep in the cold for an indeterminate amount of time. "You're the hero," she said. Her voice was steady and direct, with none of the rawness that marked the newly transformed. "The one who's been collecting us." Izuku looked at her. "Come inside," he said. Her name was Yuki Abe. She was 13, not 14, he revised his estimate after she told him, and revised his understanding of several other things at the same time. 13 years old, second year middle school, resident of the Musatafu North District. She had been transformed, as near as she could reconstruct, 19 days ago. 19 days. Longer than any of the others had managed alone. She sat at the table in the ground floor and accepted the warm water that Haru offered and looked around the room with the calculating attention she had fixed on Izuku at the door, and Izuku watched her look at each of the others and watched her process what she was seeing with a speed and precision that confirmed what he had suspected in the entryway. Cognitive dominant, he thought. Category 3, like Daichi. But not the same as Daichi, she's not reading emotional states. She's reading information. Pattern recognition. Assessment. "You've been watching the building," he said. "For 6 days, Yuki said. She said it without apology, without the self-consciousness that most people would bring to admitting surveillance. It was a fact, offered as a fact. "I needed to know what it was before I came in." "What made you decide to come in?" "I ran out of alternative options," she said. "I've been managing independently for 19 days and I've been good at it, but the hunger is getting harder and I've identified the compound in the air around this building as something that reduces hunger response chemistry, which means you have a supply in here that I don't have access to out there." She paused. "Also, the man in the Kamino district has been following me for 4 days. The room went very still. Izuku leaned forward slightly. "What man?" "Older. Very still. Moves in a way that covers distance wrong." She described it exactly as Izuku had registered the recruiting figure in the Taduan district, the fluidity, the gait that didn't map onto standard movement. "He approached me 6 days ago and told me to come with him. I said no. Since then he's been following me at a distance, which I took to mean that he intends to be patient about it rather than forceful." She looked at Izuku steadily. "I assumed that if I came here, he might not follow me in. I assumed this place has a reason to be something he doesn't approach." 6 days old, Izuku thought. The recruitment attempt was 6 days ago, before she came to watch the building. She spent 6 days surveilling us as an alternative to going with him. 13 years old. He felt the familiar weight settle in his chest, heavier this time, with a specific texture, the weight of a child who had been managing something enormous alone for 19 days, who had looked at the choice between an unknown organization in a building in Kamino and an unknown hero in an industrial facility and had chosen, with calculated precision, the one that seemed safer. She was right, he thought. I need to make sure she keeps being right. You're safe here, he said. I know, Yuki said. That's why I came in. She settled into the facility with a speed and self-sufficiency that was both reassuring and slightly unnerving. By the end of the first evening she had assessed the supply situation, identified 2 inefficiencies in the organizational system that Haru had built, and offered corrections that Haru had accepted with the directness of a person who recognized a good idea regardless of its source. She had also, quietly and without making a production of it, begun mapping the building. Izuku noticed on the second morning, the way she moved through each floor with the systematic attention of someone constructing an internal model, taking note of load-bearing points, exits, windows, the structural logic of the space. He watched her do it and said nothing for most of the morning, and then, when she came back to the ground floor and sat down at the table, he sat across from her and said, "What are you looking for?" Yuki looked at him. "Vulnerabilities," she said. "In the building?" "In the building. In the system. In the group." She said it without aggression, without the self-consciousness of someone who expects to be reprimanded. "I look for vulnerabilities in everything. It's what I do now." She paused, and something moved in her expression that was quieter than the rest of her, something that acknowledged the now without fully accepting it. "Before, I was good at math. Very good. Pattern recognition, logical structures, the architecture of numbers." She looked at her hands. "The transformation didn't change what I was good at. It just amplified it," Izuku said. "Applied it to everything." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment. "What vulnerabilities did you find?" "3, she said, without hesitation. "The blood supply is a single-point dependency. If your veterinary source stops supplying, you have nothing. The compound Dr. Sato brought, I can smell it, it's in the building's air at a low concentration, is also a single-point dependency. And the group's perimeter awareness is good for the individuals with strong sensory capability but has significant blind spots for the east side of the building, which is the side closest to the direction the Camino building is in." Izuku stared at her. "You identified all of that in one morning." "I identified most of it last night," she said. "I don't sleep much." He picked up his notebook. "Yuki," he said. "I would like to talk to you about how you'd like to contribute here." She looked at the notebook, then at him. "You're going to write down what I say?" "I'm always going to write down what you say." "Good," she said. "That means you're taking it seriously." Dr. Sato arrived on Tuesday morning and spent 40 minutes with Yuki before she came upstairs to find Izuku. She stood in the doorway of the workspace with an expression he had not seen on her before, not surprise exactly, because he had gathered that she did not surprise easily, but something adjacent to it. The expression of a person encountering something that requires the revision of an existing model. "She's Category 3, Izuku said, before Dr. Sato could speak. "She's Category 3, Dr. Sato confirmed. "But not the same Category 3 as Daichi." She paused. "She is what I would call pure cognitive expression. No emotional resonance component, no empathic dimension. Pure pattern recognition and information processing, amplified beyond what I've seen in any previous presentation." "Is that significant?" "Extremely." She came in and sat down. "There are, in the historical accounts, references to a type that the older literature called readers. Rare even within the cognitive lineage. High function, rapid adaptation, extremely difficult to manipulate because they see the structure of things before they see the surface." She paused. "They were considered, historically, very valuable. And very dangerous." "Dangerous to whom?" "To whoever wanted to keep secrets from them." She looked at Izuku steadily. "She's going to figure out everything, Izuku. Everything you know and everything you don't know yet and several things you haven't thought to look for." She paused. "The question is whether that's a resource or a liability." "It's a resource," Izuku thought immediately, with a certainty that didn't require deliberation. "She's 13 years old and she spent 19 days managing something impossible alone and she chose to come here because she calculated that it was the safest option and she has already identified 3 vulnerabilities in my system on her first morning. She is not a liability. She is exactly what this place needs and she is going to be extraordinarily capable when she understands what she's working with." "Resource," he said. Dr. Sato looked at him for a moment. "Good," she said. "Because the alternative would have been both incorrect and unkind." That evening, Izuku gathered everyone in the ground floor. All 8 of them, for the first time. The morning gatherings had become natural over the weeks, but this was different, a specific gathering, with a specific purpose, called at a specific hour. They came down and arranged themselves in the space with the ease of people who had found their positions in a room and knew them, and they looked at Izuku with the quality of attention he had come to feel as a specific weight, the weight of being the person that 8 people were looking to for something. I don't know if I deserve this, he thought. I know I haven't earned it yet. I know that what I'm about to tell them is going to make everything heavier, and I know that making things heavier is part of this, and I know that they deserve the weight of true things more than the lightness of managed ones. He told them what he knew. He started with Dr. Sato's assessment, the lineages, the deliberate staging of the transformation events, the organizational structure of what the Camino building was building toward. He told them what Nami's pattern analysis had found, the 2 sources, the anomaly of the 7 who didn't fit the sequence. He told them about Daichi's cultivation, and Daichi nodded once, without apparent surprise, because Daichi had had 2 weeks to sit with it and had made his own peace with it in the way he made peace with things, methodically and on foot. He told them about the case files All Might had accessed. 17 years of transformed individuals who had disappeared into the system that the Camino building represented. Dozens of them. More, probably, in the years before the files he had access to. He told them, finally, about the building in Camino. What it was. What it was building. What Dr. Sato believed was the long-term purpose. An army. The room was quiet for a long time when he finished. Then Takeshi said, in his quiet voice that still carried the faint rawness of someone who had been running for 6 days. They made us, and now they want us back. Not all of us, Nami said, from her position at the table. She had her notes in front of her, had been annotating as Izuku spoke. The 7 of us don't fit their pattern. We're anomalous. Whatever they're building, we're not part of the blueprint. Which means, Daichi said slowly, that we are either inconvenient or interesting to them. He looked at Izuku. Which is it? I don't know yet, Izuku said honestly. Then we find out, Yuki said. Everyone looked at her. She was sitting at the edge of the group, which was where she defaulted, present but positioned for observation, the instinct of someone who preferred to see the full room. She said it with the flat directness of a person stating a logical necessity, not a choice. Finding out is how we address the vulnerability, she said. Uncertainty about whether we're inconvenient or interesting is a liability. We need data. She looked at Izuku. The Camino building. We need to understand what's in it. Dr. Sato said not to approach it, Izuku said. Dr. Sato said not to approach it before she came back, Yuki said. She's been back. She looked around the room. I'm not suggesting we go in. I'm suggesting we get closer. Close enough for the sensory-dominant members of this group to gather information from the outside. She paused. Rei can move through walls. Daichi can read the emotional signature of a space. I can analyze structural patterns from close proximity. She looked at Izuku. That is not nothing. The room considered this. Haru said, she's not wrong. She's 13, Izuku said. I'm aware of how old I am, Yuki said. It's not relevant to the validity of the analysis. Izuku looked at her. He thought about the 19 days she had managed alone. About the 6 days she had spent surveilling the facility before choosing to come in. About the 3 vulnerabilities she had identified in one morning and the way she had described them, without flourish, without ego, as simple observations of structural fact. She's right, he thought. She's right and she's 13 years old and both of those things are true simultaneously and I need to figure out how to work with both of them. We plan it carefully, he said. We don't go without preparation. We don't go until we've walked through every possible scenario and we know what we're doing and what we do if it goes wrong. He paused. And we go as a group. Nobody goes anywhere near that building alone. Yuki nodded, as if this had been the expected answer. When? She asked. Izuku looked at the wall in his mind, the map, the pins, the 7 questions, the blank circle at the center. Next week, he said. Give me until next week. Chapter 12, The Reader and the Teacher. The week before the Camino approach was the most internally active week the facility had experienced since its first days. Not outwardly the building maintained its rhythms, the morning gatherings and the evening gatherings and the individual work that Daichi had prescribed and that had become, over weeks, genuinely itself rather than a prescribed structure. Haru and Kenji had extended the shelving project to the 2nd floor and were now engaged in a broader renovation of the space that had started as practical and had become something else, something that had to do with the difference between occupying a space temporarily and claiming it as yours. But underneath the rhythms, in the conversations in the margins of the day and the late evenings on the 3rd floor in the hours between midnight and 4 when the building was quietest and most honest, the week was dense with preparation and with something harder to name. Izuku spent most of it with Yuki. This surprised him. In retrospect, he had expected to spend the week on logistics, on the operational planning for the Camino approach, on the case files and the map and the 7 questions growing into 10. He had expected Yuki to be a resource he would consult for specific analyses and then return to the general work of the group. What actually happened was that Yuki followed the work. She appeared in the workspace on Monday morning, assessed the wall with the systematic attention she brought to all new environments, and sat down in the second chair without asking permission. She looked at the classification system. "This is wrong," she said. "I know," Izuku said. "Which part?" She pointed. "The category boundaries. You're dividing by primary expression, but primary expression isn't stable, it shifts with duration of transformation and with circumstance." She traced the columns with one finger. A better division would be by transmission lineage and then by secondary function within the lineage. She paused. "And you're missing at least 2 categories that aren't represented in this group." "How do you know?" "The organizational logic of what they're building in Camino implies it." She looked at him. "You've been thinking of the categories as descriptive. They're also predictive. If you understand the structure, you can extrapolate what types are needed to complete it." Izuku looked at her for a long moment. Then he moved his chair beside hers, opened his notebook, and said, "Show me." They worked together for 6 hours that first day, and 5 the next, and by Wednesday the wall had been substantially revised, not replaced, because the structure Izuku had built contained real information that didn't need to be discarded, but reorganized, clarified, extended. Yuki worked with a precision and speed that required Izuku to think faster than he was accustomed to thinking, to follow connections across larger spans without losing track of where he had started, to hold multiple structural levels in his mind simultaneously. It was, he realized on Wednesday afternoon, the closest thing to a pure intellectual conversation he had experienced in years. Possibly since UA, since the study sessions with Ida and Uraka that had sharpened his thinking in ways he hadn't fully valued until they were gone from his daily life. "You were good at math before," he said, during a pause. "Very good," she said, without particular emphasis. "What kind?" "All kinds." She was looking at the revised classification chart, tilting her head slightly. "But theoretical structures most. The architecture of systems. How things connect to each other, where the load-bearing points are, what fails first when something goes wrong." She paused. "It's the same thing I'm doing now. Just with different material." "Does it bother you?" Izuku asked, "that it's the same? That the transformation took what you were and amplified it," she said, as she had before. "Yes." She considered the question with the deliberateness she brought to everything that wasn't immediate analysis. "It bothers me that I didn't choose it," she said finally. "The amplification itself, no. Being better at the thing I was best at is not something I find distressing." She paused. "Being made better at it by someone else, for their purposes, that I find distressing." "Their purposes," Izuku said. "You believe you were transformed deliberately." "I know I was transformed deliberately," she said. "I identified the pattern in the transformation events within 3 days of understanding what had happened to me. Nami's analysis confirmed it, but I'd already arrived at the same conclusion independently." She looked at him. "Someone transformed me to specifications. A 13-year-old reader in a city where they're building an organization that needs analytical capacity." She paused. "I was a resource they created." The room was quiet. "And then you didn't go to them," Izuku said. "No." "Why not?" She looked at the wall for a moment. "Because the man in Camino who followed me," she said, "when he approached me and told me to come with him," she paused. "I read him. The way I read everything. And what I read was that he was not offering me a choice. He was performing the offer of a choice in order to achieve a specific outcome." She turned to look at Izuku. "I don't respond well to that." "Neither do I," Izuku thought. "And when you read me," he said, at the door, that first night. "You were offering an actual choice," she said. "The difference is legible if you know how to look." He thought about that for a moment. "Can you always tell?" "Almost always." She paused. "There are people whose intentions are genuinely mixed, who are offering a real choice and also hoping for a specific outcome, and those two things exist in them simultaneously without contradiction. Those are harder to read cleanly." She looked at him. "You're sometimes one of those." "Mixed?" "You genuinely want us to choose freely. And you also want us to stay." She said it without judgment, as a structural observation. "The two don't contradict each other in you. But they're both present." Izuku was quiet for a moment. "That's accurate," he said. "I know," she said. On Thursday, Daichi came to the workspace. He arrived in the late afternoon, when the light through the high windows had shifted to the amber of early evening, and he stood in the doorway and looked at the revised wall and took it in with the slow, comprehensive attention that characterized him. "It's better," he said. "Yuki revised most of it," Izuku said. "I know." He came in and sat down and looked at the chart. "She showed me her working last night. She wanted a second assessment of the emotional topology mapping." He paused. "She said she values my experience with the resonance dimension even though she doesn't share it." "That's generous of her." "It's practical of her," Daichi said, without unkindness. "Yuki values accuracy above generosity. The generosity, when it's present, is a byproduct of accuracy." He paused. "Which is not a criticism." "I know." Daichi was quiet for a moment, looking at the revised chart. "She's going to be remarkable," he said. "In a few years, when she has more experience to apply the analysis to." She looked at Izuku. "She's also going to be lonely in ways that are difficult to address, because the people who can operate at her level are rare, and the people who can operate at her level and are willing to be honest with her are rarer still." Is that a description of her, Izuku thought, or a description of you? 41 years of being the sharpest reader in the room and having to manage the distance that creates? "What did you want to talk about?" Izuku asked. Daichi looked at him. "The Camino approach," he said. "I want to discuss what I'm going to encounter when we get close to the building." "Your resonance reading?" "Yes." He folded his hands. "I've been thinking about what I told you, that the building felt like a held breath when we visited. I've been thinking about what that means in terms of what I'll receive when we're closer, with the intention of receiving rather than just passing by." He paused. "The emotional signature of a large number of transformed individuals in a confined space will be significant. And unlike the others, I don't have the option of filtering. What I receive completely." Izuku looked at him. "Are you saying it might be too much?" "I'm saying I want to be prepared," Daichi said. "Not dissuaded." "Prepared." He paused. "There's a difference between knowing that something will be difficult and deciding not to do it, and knowing that something will be difficult and deciding to do it anyway with a clear understanding of the cost." He looked at Izuku. "I've been in this building for 6 weeks. I've been receiving the emotional weather of 8 people in an enclosed space, and I've been managing it." He paused. "I need to know whether you believe I can extend that management to what the Camino building will generate." "I don't know," Izuku thought honestly. "I don't know because I don't know what's in that building and I don't know how many and I don't know what their collective emotional state is like when they're all present in the same space. I know what 41 years of teaching gives a person in terms of the capacity to be present in difficulty without being overwhelmed by it. I know what I've seen of you in this building. I know that you've been carrying more than anyone here without complaint and with a quality of grace that I find difficult to look at directly sometimes because it makes me feel the inadequacy of what I'm able to offer you in return. I trust your judgment about what you can manage," he said. "More than I trust my judgment about it from the outside. If you tell me you can do this, I believe you." Daichi looked at him for a long time. "That's the right answer," he said quietly. "I'm learning," Izuku said. Daichi almost smiled. "Yes," he said. "You are." Friday evening, Izuku found Kenji alone on the second floor. The renovation had been progressing steadily. The space was beginning to look less like an empty industrial floor and more like somewhere people had decided to be. There were shelves along 2 walls now, the product of Haru and Kenji's sustained effort, and a cluster of furniture at the far end that had been moved from the ground floor to create a space that was slightly more separated from the main common area. Kenji was sitting in that space, with a textbook open on his knees and a notebook beside him, and he looked up when Izuku appeared at the top of the stairs with the expression of someone who has been interrupted in genuine concentration. "Sorry," Izuku said. "I can go." "No." Kenji closed the textbook and set it aside. "I was due for a break." Izuku came and sat in the chair across from him. He looked at the textbook, literature, university entrance level, the book he had picked up from Kenji's house 3 weeks ago after a careful, timed visit while Kenji's mother was at work. He had put the key under the door after, the way Kenji had instructed him, and had stood in the hallway of a house that smelled of someone's ordinary life and had felt, briefly, the full weight of what it meant to be the person who went to these places and came back with the objects that people could no longer retrieve themselves. "How's the studying going?" he asked. "Better than I expected," Kenji said. He looked at the textbook. "I thought I wouldn't be able to focus. I thought everything would make focusing impossible. But it's actually the opposite." He paused. "When I'm working through a problem, everything else gets quiet. The hunger, the sensory noise, it all steps back." He looked at Izuku. "Like what Haru said about the construction work." "The purposeful activity," Izuku said. "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. I think Daichi understood something about us when he proposed this. Not just the theory of it. Something more specific. He paused. He knew that what we needed wasn't just to manage the hunger. He knew we needed to still be people who were going somewhere. Izuku looked at him. Going somewhere, he thought. University entrance exams for a boy who has been transformed at 17, who doesn't know what his body will do next, who can't go home and can't make contact and can hear every heartbeat in a 100-meter radius. Still studying for university entrance exams. Still going somewhere. You're going to take those exams, Izuku said. It was not a question. I don't know how, yet, Kenji said. But yes. He met Izuku's eyes. Will you help me figure out how? I don't know how either, Izuku thought. I don't know what the logistics look like, I don't know whether the physical changes are stable enough to allow it, I don't know what documentation would be required or how any of that intersects with a situation that doesn't exist in any official framework. I know that he's asking, and that the asking is itself a form of hope, and that hope in this building is not something I am willing to let run out of things to attach to. Yes, Izuku said. I'll help you figure out how. Kenji nodded. He picked up the textbook again, a gesture of return rather than dismissal. Izuku started to stand. Izuku, Kenji said. Yeah. The Camino thing. He didn't look up from the textbook. The approach. I want to come. Izuku was quiet for a moment. You're category 1, he said. Sensory dominant. Your range is significant, Kenji said. I know. He paused. Which means I can gather information from further away than almost anyone else in this building, without getting as close. He looked up. I'm not asking to be part of the approach team. I'm asking to be part of the operation. He's right, Izuku thought. His hearing range is the greatest of any of them. If the goal is to gather information about the building from outside, he is literally the most useful person I could bring. Okay, he said. I'll include you in the planning. Kenji looked back at his textbook. Thank you, he said. Chapter 13, The Approach. They went on Sunday night. 6 of them, Izuku, Daichi, Rei, Yuki, Kenji, and Nami. Haru stayed behind with Sora and Takeshi, not as a concession to their safety, though it was that too, but because Haru's Category 2 physicality made him exactly the wrong profile for an operation where the goal was to gather information without being detected, and because Sora's developing awareness of peripheral figures meant the building needed someone in it who would not panic if she reported something at the window. Izuku had spent 4 days on the planning. He had drawn the approach routes on a map, mapped the sight lines from the Camino building's windows, identified 3 observation positions at varying distances that would give them different kinds of information, and established a communication system using the particular low-frequency sounds that the transformed were able to produce and perceive but that fell below the range of most human hearing. He had also spent 4 days thinking about what could go wrong, and had identified 11 scenarios, and had contingencies for 9 of them, and had accepted that the other 2 were the kind of scenarios you couldn't fully contingency plan because they involved unknowns too large to map. This is what it is, he told himself. Incomplete information, calculated risk, the best judgment you can make with what you have. They left the facility at midnight. The Camino district at midnight had a character that was distinct from its daytime self, the older architecture deepening the shadows, the narrow streets emptying to a specific quality of absence that felt less like the city at rest and more like the city holding something back. Izuku moved with the others through the route he had planned, keeping to the less lit streets, moving quickly and quietly in the way that 6 transformed individuals could move when they applied themselves to it, with a collective silence that would have been remarkable if there had been anyone to remark on it. He watched them move and felt, as he sometimes did when the group was operating together, the specific quality of what had been built in the building over the past weeks. Not a team in the institutional sense, not trained, not coordinated through any official process. Something that had grown from proximity and trust and shared difficulty, which was a different kind of coordination and in some ways a more reliable one. They reached the first observation position, a rooftop 2 streets from the Camino building, at 12:40. Kenji sat at the edge of the roof and closed his eyes. The others watched him. The quality of attention he was focusing was visible in his face, the specific concentration of someone directing a sense to a target, filtering everything else out. His head tilted slightly, the way it did when he was locating something by sound. After 3 minutes, he said quietly. 43, minimum. Possibly more, there are areas of the building I can't fully penetrate acoustically from here. He paused. All transformed. I can tell by the heartbeat pattern, it's different from baseline human, you can hear it once you know what you're listening for. He paused again. There are at least 4 that are different from the others. Older. The same quality as the figure you described from the Tatooine district. Izuku looked at Nami. She was writing in the small notebook she had brought, the numbers arriving and being organized immediately. 43, she murmured. 43 in one building. That's significantly more than I estimated. More than I estimated too, Izuku thought. Based on the documented incidents, I estimated 20 to 30. 43 means either the documentation rate is much lower than I thought, or the transformation rate has been accelerating. Activity level? He asked Kenji. Low. Most of them are in a state like sleep, not human sleep, but the stillness that some of us go into. He paused. The 4 older ones are awake. Moving. There, he tilted his head further. They're in a room together. Upper floor, I think. Talking. Can you hear what they're saying? From here, no. The building's construction is, he frowned slightly, concentrating. Dense. Old materials. Something in the walls absorbs sound more than modern construction would. Daichi, Izuku said quietly. Daichi was already doing it. He had been in a state of focused reception since they'd arrived on the rooftop, his eyes open and directed at the building with a quality of attention that was both completely still and deeply active. He looked the way he looked during the morning gatherings sometimes, present on multiple levels simultaneously, receiving more than was visible. I can feel it from here, he said, quietly. The aggregate emotional signature. He was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet his face moved through something difficult that he managed without losing the quality of composure. It's heavy. The dominant register is, he paused. I want to say loyalty, but that's not quite right. Something older than loyalty. Something that has become so long-standing and total that it has stopped requiring the conscious reaffirmation that loyalty requires. He paused. Like gravity. They follow because following has become structural. Not loyalty, Izuku thought. Not choice. Structural. Like gravity. An army that follows because following has become structural. How do you undo something that has become structural? How do you offer a choice to people who have forgotten that the alternative to following existed? Is there anything else? He asked. Fear, Daichi said. Under the gravity. Faint, old, compressed into something smaller than fear usually is by a long time of being managed. He paused. And something I wasn't expecting. What? Waiting, Daichi said. They are all 43, in a state of waiting. Something is expected. Something is coming that they have been told to be ready for. He paused. I can't determine what. But the anticipation is significant. Uniform. Like they've all been given the same information and they're all pointing in the same direction. The rooftop was quiet. Waiting, Izuku thought. For what? A specific event? A specific person? A threshold, a number reached, a preparation complete? Or are they waiting for something to happen to us? Rei, he said. She was already looking at him. Second position, he said. As close as you're willing to go. Nothing through the walls, I want you back in 3 minutes. She nodded once. Then she stepped off the edge of the roof. Not a fall, a controlled descent, her body moving through the edge of the building's surface with the partial permeability that was still intermittent, still tied to emotional state, but that she had been practicing for weeks and had brought to a level of reliability that she trusted. She landed at street level without a sound and moved toward the Camino building. The others watched from the roof. Izuku watched Daichi's face. Daichi watched the building. 2 minutes and 40 seconds after she had left, Rei reappeared at the base of the fire escape below them and climbed back to the roof with the fluid efficiency of someone no longer performing movement for human observation. The exterior surface of the building, she said, quietly and immediately, with the quality of someone delivering a prepared report. It has a quality I haven't encountered before. She paused. Usually when I engage with a surface, a wall, a floor, there's a resistance that I can work through or not, depending on my state. She paused. This building doesn't have that resistance. It doesn't resist. She searched for the word. It invites. Izuku looked at her. What does that mean? It means the surface is designed to let things through, she said. Or it has been used that way so often and for so long that the material has changed. She looked at him steadily. I didn't go through. It felt wrong in a way I can't fully explain. Like a door held open by something that expects you to enter on its terms. A trap, Yuki said, from where she had been sitting at the edge of the group, silent and recording. Everyone looked at her. Not necessarily an active one, she said. It might just be the architecture. But something about that building has been engineered for permeability and it is not engineered for our benefit. She paused. The same way a fisherman's net is permeable. Things go in easily. She paused. The question is the exit. The silence on the rooftop had a specific texture. 43, Izuku thought. Waiting. Structural loyalty. A building engineered for permeability. Something expected. We're done for tonight, he said. We have what we came for. No one argued. They descended from the rooftop in sequence and moved back through the Camino district in the way they had come, and the building behind them stood in the dark with its closed-eye windows, and whatever was inside it continued to wait for whatever it had been told was coming. They were 3 streets away when Kenji said, quietly. One of the 4 older ones stopped moving when we left. Izuku kept walking. What do you mean? When we first arrived, all 4 of the older ones were moving. Circuiting the upper floor, back and forth. He paused. When we left, 3 of them continued. 1 stopped. Where did it stop? Upper floor. East-facing room. He paused. The side of the building closest to us. It heard us leave, Izuku thought. Or it felt us. Or it knew we were there from the moment we arrived, and it stopped to listen to us go. He kept his pace steady. How long did it stay stopped? Until we turned the first corner, Kenji said. Then it started moving again. Izuku walked and thought and said nothing. They know we exist, he thought. They've known since Sora's drawing, since the figure at the roofline, since the man in Camino who followed Yuki for 6 days. They know the building, they know the approximate number, they know at minimum that a hero is involved. And they are waiting. For what are they waiting? He turned the corner and the Camino district fell behind them and the city opened up in all directions, full of its ordinary night, and he walked with 8 people who had been made without being asked and who were choosing, every day, to be something other than what they had been made for. Whatever they're waiting for, he thought, we're going to be ready. He was not entirely certain this was true. But he walked as if it was, and the others walked beside him, and the night held them all equally, and the city kept its secrets for 1 more hour. End of chapter 13, Blood That Binds. Chapter 14, What Waits in the Dark. The morning after the Camino approach, nobody talked about it directly. This was not avoidance. Izuku had learned the difference between the group's avoidance and the group's processing, and they were distinct in texture and in the quality of silence they produced. Avoidance had a specific tightness to it, a managed quality, the silence of people working to keep something contained. Processing was different. Processing was the silence of people carrying something through their internal landscape at their own pace, turning it over, finding where it fit alongside everything else they were carrying. The morning gathering had that second quality. They sat in the ground floor in the early light and Haru made the thing he called soup and Sora had her sketchbook and Takeshi sat within the circle rather than at its edge, which was something he had been doing for the past week and which Izuku registered each morning as a small, significant data point. The 6 who had gone out the night before sat among the 3 who had stayed, and the building held all of them, and for 20 minutes the most important thing that happened was that people were present in the same room. Then Yuki said, to no one in particular. I've been thinking about the waiting. Everyone looked at her. She was eating something from a package with the distracted efficiency of someone who treats food as a logistical requirement rather than an experience, her eyes on the middle distance. What about it? Daichi asked. The uniform state of anticipation, she said. The fact that all 43 of them are waiting for the same thing, and that the state is uniform and total. She paused. That level of unified anticipatory orientation doesn't arise naturally. It's been installed. Installed, Nami said. Someone has told them something specific, Yuki said. A date, a threshold, a trigger condition. Something concrete enough that 43 transformed individuals are all pointing in the same direction simultaneously. She paused. Which means whoever is directing the organization in that building has a communication mechanism that reaches all members uniformly and that the members trust absolutely. Structural loyalty, Daichi had said. Like gravity. The older ones, Izuku said. The 4 that Kenji identified as different. You think they're the communication mechanism? I think they're the hierarchy, Yuki said. The 4 oldest in the building are probably the most senior. They would be the ones who receive the communication from whatever is above them and transmitted it downward. She paused. Which means whatever they're waiting for comes from something above the building in Camino. Something we haven't found yet. Something above the building in Camino, Izuku thought. He looked at his notebook. He looked at the wall in his mind, the map, the pins, the revised classification system, the 7 questions that had become 10. I've been thinking of the Camino building as the top of the structure, he thought. I've been thinking of it as the source. But it's not the source. It's a node. It's one building in one city, and if it has a hierarchy above it, Then there are other buildings in other cities, and there is something above all of them, and I have been looking at the bottom of a structure and thinking I was looking at the top. How far up does it go? He asked. Yuki looked at him. That, she said, is the question I've been trying to construct a methodology for answering. She paused. I need more data. I need the case files from other cities. All Might is working on it, Izuku said. He needs to work faster, Yuki said. Not unkindly. As a structural observation. All Might came back 3 days later. He arrived in the morning, which was earlier than his usual visit time, and he arrived with a box. The box contained files, more than the previous delivery, significantly more, the accumulated documentation of 17 years across 4 cities that a former hero with a network of trusted former colleagues had spent the past 2 weeks carefully extracting from systems that were not designed to be extracted from. He set the box on the desk in the workspace, looked at Izuku, and said, "It's larger than I thought." "How much larger?" "The 4 cities I have files on show a combined incident count of over 300 in the documented period alone." He paused. "The documentation rate, based on the ratio I can calculate from your work here, is probably between 15 and 20% of actual events." Izuku stared at the box. 300 documented, he thought. Times 5, conservatively. 1,500. In 4 cities. In 17 years. And that's 4 cities. There are hundreds of cities. How many cities? He asked. I don't know the full scope, All Might said. The files I have are limited to what my contacts could access. But the pattern of the 4 cities, the clustering, the staged rollout, the organizational structure, it's consistent. It's the same operation. He paused. Which means it's centrally coordinated. From where? All Might was quiet for a moment. There's something in the files, he said. A name. It appears twice, in 2 different cities' documentation, in case reports that are 15 years apart. He reached into the box and produced 2 folders, opening them to the relevant pages. Here, and here. He set them on the desk. Izuku looked at the pages. The name was not in the incident reports themselves, it was in the investigator's notes, the informal annotations that case officers added to the margins of official documentation. In both cases it appeared as a reference in the same form, subject mentioned, and then the name, followed by a question mark, followed by the investigator's apparent decision to not pursue it further. The name was Kurogane. Kurogane, Izuku said. I found nothing else under that name in any hero agency database, All Might said. Which is either because it's a pseudonym, or because the name predates the current database architecture, or because whoever or whatever Kurogane is has been very effective at not being documented. He paused. Or all 3. Izuku looked at the name. Kurogane, he thought. 2 mentions, 15 years apart, in cities 400 kilometers from each other, in case files that were subsequently closed without follow-up. A name that appears at the edges of things, in the margins of official documentation, in the annotations of investigators who registered something and then decided not to pursue it. The same way I registered things for 6 weeks before I admitted what they were. He wrote the name at the top of a fresh page. Then he wrote below it, what are you? Yuki spent 4 days with the new files. She worked with a concentration that was total and that required, Izuku discovered, a specific kind of support, not assistance with the analysis, which she did not need, but the occasional provision of food and water at intervals, because she had a tendency to forget that her body required maintenance when her mind was fully engaged with a problem. He brought things to the workspace and set them beside her without interrupting, and she consumed them without appearing to notice, and the work continued. On the 4th day she produced a document. It was 8 pages of dense, precise notation, not narrative, not explanation, just the architecture of what she had found, set out in the logical structure that was her native language. Izuku read it twice before he asked her to walk him through it. She walked him through it for 2 hours. When she was done, he sat with it for a long time. The structure was this: the organization that operated through the building in Kamino was not a single organization. It was a franchise. The word Yuki used was cell structure, which was more precise, but franchise was the intuitive model that helped Izuku understand it. Each city had a building, or multiple buildings, that operated with local autonomy within a framework of rules and objectives that came from above. The transformation events in each city followed the same staged pattern: physical capacity first, then sensory infrastructure, then cognitive layer, because the framework specified it. The buildings reported upward to regional coordinators, who reported further upward to something that Yuki had been unable to identify with precision from the available data, but that the shape of the documentation suggested was singular, old, and not located in any of the 4 cities she had analyzed. Kurogane, Izuku thought. The top of the structure, he said. Or something very close to the top, Yuki said. The documentation I have reaches as far as the regional coordinator level. Above that it becomes inference. She paused. But the inference is strong. The consistency of the staged rollout across 4 cities, across 17 years of documented history and certainly longer before that, requires a unifying intelligence. Something that designed the framework and has been maintaining it. And the anomalies, Izuku said. Us. The 7 who don't fit the pattern. Yuki was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about that separately, she said. Because the anomaly analysis requires a different kind of reasoning. She paused. We don't fit the organizational pattern. But we weren't created outside it. The staged rollout in Musetafu was proceeding according to the standard framework when the 7 of us were transformed. We were interleaved with the organizational build-out in a way that suggests someone with access to the framework made a decision to create us alongside it, but separately from it. Someone within the organization, Izuku said. Someone with sufficient access to the framework to make transformation decisions independently of the standard rollout, yes. She paused. Someone who wanted specific types that weren't specified in the standard framework. She looked at Izuku. Daichi's cultivation, my reader capacity, Nami's unknown lineage. These are not standard issue organizational assets. These are something else. What? Yuki was quiet for a long time. I think, she said carefully, that someone within the structure is building something of their own. Using the framework as cover, using the standard rollout as camouflage for a separate project. She paused. Which means there are 2 things happening in this city simultaneously. The standard organizational build-out that reports upward to Kurogane. And something else, something parallel, that someone lower in the hierarchy is running independently. 2 sources, Nami had said, a week and a half ago on the roof. The numbers point toward a second source. Do you know who? Izuku asked. Not yet, Yuki said. But I have a hypothesis. She paused. The 4 older ones in the Camino building. Kenji identified them as distinct from the others, older, more settled, different quality. They are almost certainly the local hierarchy. The ones who manage the Musetafu cell on behalf of the regional coordinator. She paused. The question is whether all 4 of them are operating within the standard framework, or whether one of them has a separate agenda. One of them, Izuku thought. One of the 4 oldest in the building. Someone who has been part of the organization long enough to have the access and the knowledge to run a parallel project. Someone who transforms 7 specific people to specific specifications and then, what? Let them go? Let them find their own way, hoping they'd end up somewhere accessible? Let them find me? The thought arrived quietly and sat in his mind with a weight that he did not immediately examine. Yuki, he said. Yes. Do you think we were guided here? To this building, to each other? She looked at him. I think, she said, that the probability of 8 anomalous transformed individuals independently converging on a single location in a city of several million people, within a window of 6 weeks, without some directional element, is very low. She paused. I think you were chosen to find us. And I think we were given the conditions under which finding you was the most logical available choice. She paused again. Whether that constitutes being guided depends on how you define the term. Izuku sat with that for a long time. Chosen to find them. Set up as the point of convergence. By someone within the organization who is running a parallel project. Someone who watched Izuku Midoriya, junior pro hero, earnest and stubborn and constitutionally unable to walk away from people who needed help, and thought, yes. That one. Why? What does the parallel project want? He asked. That, Yuki said, I don't know yet. She looked at him steadily. But I intend to find out. That night, Izuku couldn't sleep. This was not unusual, but the quality of the sleeplessness was different from its usual form. Usually the sleeplessness was anxious, the mind turning over problems, running through scenarios, doing the work that it couldn't put down. Tonight it was something else. Tonight it was the specific wakefulness of someone who has received information that has shifted the ground beneath them and is still in the process of finding their footing. Chosen, he thought, in the dark of the workspace with the lamp off and the city outside the high windows. I was chosen for this. He had built the facility on the assumption that it was his idea. His response, his choice, his construction. The notebook and the case files and the colored string and the walls covered in questions, all of it felt like the product of his own attention, his own concern, his own refusal to look at something that needed help and walk away from it. But what if the conditions for that choice were constructed? He thought. What if someone looked at me, at Izuku Midoriya, 22 years old, junior hero, the specific combination of stubbornness and empathy and the inability to stop asking questions, and designed a situation in which I would do exactly this. He sat in the dark and turned it over. Does that change what I've built? Does it change what the 8 people downstairs are to me, or what they need, or what I'm trying to give them? Does the fact that someone engineered the conditions for this choice make the choice itself less real? He thought about All Might, years ago, asking him what kind of hero he wanted to be. He thought about all the choices that had led to this building, this room, this notebook, these 8 people. He thought about the fact that he had been shaped by everything that had ever happened to him, by All Might and by UA and by every fight and every failure and every moment of choosing to get up and try again, and that being shaped by your circumstances and your history was not the same as being controlled by them. That the choices you made within the conditions you were given were still yours. Still mine, he thought. Whatever someone planned or didn't plan. What I do now is still mine. But there was something else in the thought, something that he needed to sit with honestly. If I was chosen for this, if someone designed these conditions, they know me. They know what I'll do. They've been watching long enough to understand how I respond to need, to mystery, to the specific combination of people who require help and information that demands to be understood. They know what I'll do next. Which means, he thought, whatever comes next has been anticipated. He got up and turned on the lamp and opened his notebook. He wrote at the top of a new page. If this was designed, what is it designed to produce? He stared at the question. 8 specific types gathered in one location. A reader, a cultivated resonance, an unknown lineage, and 5 others who don't fit the organizational standard rollout. Gathered around a hero who will not stop asking questions and will not stop trying to protect them. What does that assembly produce, that someone wanted produced? He wrote the answer slowly, as it arrived. A counterstructure. An alternative to what the Camino building is building. A group of anomalies with specific capabilities, organized around a principle of choice rather than structural loyalty, protected by someone with hero training and hero instincts, positioned in the same city as the cell they're meant to. He stopped. He wrote, counter. He looked at the word. Someone within the organization is building a counter to the organization, he thought. Using the organization's own tools, the transformation mechanism, the lineage framework, the city where the cell is most active, to construct something that can oppose it. And they chose me to hold it together. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Why me? He thought. Of all the people in this city, of all the heroes and researchers and capable individuals who might have been chosen as the convergence point, why a 22-year-old junior hero with a notebook and a third of a salary? He thought about it for a long time. Then, slowly, an answer arrived that he did not entirely like. Because a senior hero would have reported it, he thought. Because an institutional figure would have activated the official response. Because someone with more power or more experience or more access would have handled it the way institutions handle things, containment, documentation, management. Because whoever designed this needed someone who would do exactly what I did, build a shelter instead of a prison. Trust instead of control. Care instead of management. They needed someone who would treat these people as people. He looked at the notebook. They needed me to be exactly who I am. He felt something complicated move through him. Something that was not quite gratitude and not quite violation and not quite determination, but contained elements of all 3. The feeling of being seen accurately by someone you hadn't chosen to be seen by, and finding that the accurate seeing had been used, and not knowing yet whether that use was something you were willing to accept. I'll find out, he thought. I'll find out who designed this and why and what they want from the counterstructure they've been building. And then I'll decide whether to keep building it on their terms or my own. He closed the notebook. Outside, the city ran on, indifferent and unknowing, carrying all its ordinary lives over the top of everything that was moving beneath it. In the building below him, 8 people were sleeping, or not sleeping, or sitting in their particular stillness, each of them a specific person with a specific history and a specific future that was not yet written, each of them here because a chain of choices, theirs and his and someone else's, tangled together in ways he was only beginning to understand, had brought them to this building at this time. Whatever someone planned, he thought again. What I do now is still mine. He turned off the lamp and lay down on the cot and looked at the ceiling in the dark. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow I'll tell them. And then, because his body had run out of arguments, he slept. Chapter 15, What We Are. He told them at the morning gathering. All 8 of them, the full circle, in the ground floor with the early light coming through the high windows and Haru's soup on the table and Sora's sketchbook closed on her knees for once because she had come to this gathering sensing, with the particular sensitivity she had developed over weeks, that it was not a sketchbook morning. Izuku told them what Yuki had found. He told them about the cell structure, the franchise model, the regional coordinators and the singular intelligence above them that two case files 15 years apart had called Kurogane. He told them about the parallel project, the second source, the someone within the organization who had assembled 8 anomalous individuals around a convergence point. He told them what he had arrived at in the dark of the workspace, that they had been designed as a counterstructure. That he had been chosen as the center of it. He told them honestly, without management, without the calibrated delivery of difficult information that he had been practicing since the beginning. He told it the way Daichi had told him about the cultivation, because they deserve the weight of true things more than the lightness of managed ones. When he finished, the room was quiet for a long time. Then Takeshi said, "So we were made on purpose." "Yes. By someone who wants us to be a problem for the Camino building. That's my best current understanding." "And you didn't know this when you started?" "No." Takeshi was quiet for a moment. He was sitting fully within the circle, which he had been doing for a week, and his posture had the particular quality that Izuku had come to recognize in him, the quality of someone who is no longer braced for impact because they have decided that bracing is less useful than being present. "Does it change anything?" Takeshi asked. The question sat in the room. Does it change anything, Izuku thought. That's the question. Not, are you angry that you were designed? Not, do you feel violated by the manipulation? Just, does it change anything? He looked around the circle. He looked at Haru, who was holding his mug with the patient attention of someone waiting for the answer that would let him know what the next task was. At Kenji, who had his notebook open but wasn't writing in it. At Sora, who had her closed sketchbook pressed against her chest with both hands. At Rei, who was looking at Izuku with the steady, unornamented attention that she gave to things that mattered. At Daichi, who was looking at nothing in particular with the expression of a man who has been processing this longer than the others because he had more pieces to process. At Nami, whose face had the quality of an accountant who has found the discrepancy and is now deciding what to do about it. At Yuki, who was watching the room with the systematic attention of someone mapping the responses. For me, no, Izuku said. What I've built here, what we've built here, it wasn't built because someone designed the conditions for it. It was built because each of you needed somewhere to go and I wasn't willing to let you not have it. He paused. The conditions were designed. The choices were ours. He paused again. That's what I believe. I think each of you has to decide for yourselves whether you believe it too. Another silence. Then Haru set down his mug. I was a construction worker, he said, for 8 years. Every building I worked on was designed by someone else. Someone else decided what it was going to be, where it was going to go, what it was going to hold. He paused. But the building that got built was built by the people who built it. He looked at Izuku. The design doesn't own the building. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically, the same quiet shift that Izuku had come to recognize as the group's particular way of arriving at something important, without fanfare, without ceremony. I want to know who designed it, Nami said. Her voice was calm and direct. Not because it changes what we are or what we're doing. Because the unknown is a liability and whoever this person is, they know us well enough to have built this and we know nothing about them. Agreed, Yuki said. I've been working on it, Izuku said. Yuki has been working on it. We're getting closer. How close? Nami asked. Close enough that I think the answer is in the Camino building, Izuku said. In one of the 4 oldest ones. Someone who has been part of the organization long enough to have the access and the knowledge, but who has a separate agenda. He paused. We need to identify which one. Kenji can tell us more about the 4 if we go back, Rei said. It was the first time she had spoken, and the room gave the weight to her words that it always gave to hers, not more attention, exactly, but a quality of stillness that suggested what she said was received fully. That's the next step, Izuku confirmed. Daichi cleared his throat. Everyone looked at him. He was looking at the table, with the expression he wore when he was about to say something that had been assembled over a long time. I want to say something, he said. Not about the strategy. About this. He lifted his eyes to the room. I spent 17 years teaching. I taught literature, which is another way of saying I spent 17 years asking young people to look at stories and find in them something true about being human. He paused. The story we're in is not the story any of us would have chosen. We were transformed without consent, assembled without knowledge, placed in a design we didn't know existed. He paused. And yet. He looked around the circle, slowly. In this building, in the months since Izuku started finding us, I have witnessed more genuine choice, more authentic courage, more true care than I witnessed in 17 years of working with the best students I ever had. He paused. Whatever someone designed. Whatever the architecture of this situation was before we arrived in it. He paused. What we have made of it is ours. He looked at Izuku. Completely and without qualification. The room was very quiet. Then Sora put her sketchbook on the table, opened it to a fresh page, and began to draw. Nobody asked her what she was drawing. They didn't need to. The act of it was its own answer, the specific declaration of someone who processes truth by making it visible, who had heard something worth recording and was recording it. Izuku looked at the circle of people around him. He thought about the name on the page upstairs. Kurogane. He thought about the 43 in the Camino building, pointing in the same direction, waiting for something that was coming. He thought about the 4 oldest ones, one of whom might have designed this, one of whom had watched him find 8 people and build them a shelter and had, what? Waited to see what he would do? Was still waiting? Whatever they're waiting for, he thought, they're going to find something they didn't design. Because the thing about designing conditions was that you could not design people. You could design the circumstances of a meeting, the logic of a choice, the architecture of a situation. But the people who moved through those circumstances brought everything they were, all the specific, unrepeatable particularity of who they had become before the design reached them, and what emerged from the encounter of people with designed circumstances was never entirely what the designer had intended. We are what we've made of this, he thought. And what we've made of this is something nobody designed. He looked at Yuki, who was watching the room with her systematic attention, and he thought, you are the most precise analytical mind I have ever encountered, and you are 13 years old and you chose this building over the alternative, and that choice was yours. He looked at Daichi, who had just given the best speech Izuku had ever heard in a morning gathering and who walked his slow circuits every evening because that was how he worked through difficult things, and who had been cultivated over years by someone who had entirely miscalculated what he would do with what he became. He looked at Haru, who built things because building things was honest, who had extended the shelving project to the 2nd floor not because anyone asked him to but because that was how he expressed the decision to be somewhere permanently rather than temporarily. He looked at Kenji, studying for university entrance exams in a building for vampires in an industrial district because he was still, despite everything, the person who was going somewhere. He looked at Sora, drawing. He looked at Rei, present and watchful and 3 weeks ago terrified in a dumpster behind a building in Dagobah. He looked at Nami, whose numbers never stopped adding up toward the truth. He looked at Takeshi, sitting within the circle. Ours, he thought. Completely and without qualification. After the gathering, Izuku went upstairs and stood at the wall for a long time. He looked at the map. He looked at the name Kurogane on the new page. He looked at the 10 questions and the classification system that Yuki had revised and the photograph of Sora's shadow figure at the center. Then he took down the photograph and looked at it again. The shadow at the edge of the frame. The 2 points of reflected light where the eyes should have been. The quality of presence that Sora had described as not confused, as knowing exactly what it was and exactly what it was doing. He had pinned it at the center because it felt like the beginning of an answer. He looked at it now and thought about the 4 oldest ones in the Camino building. One of whom had designed this. One of whom had watched him from windows and rooftops and the edges of Sora's drawings and had let him build and had waited. What are you waiting for? He thought, looking at the shadow. What do you want from what we've made? No answer. The photograph offered only its shadow, its 2 points of light, its quality of knowing. He pinned it back at the center of the map. He opened his notebook to a fresh page and wrote at the top. We know what you built. We know roughly why. We don't know who you are. But we're going to find out. He looked at the words for a moment. Then, below them, in smaller letters. And when we do, the question is whether you're what we've been hoping for, or another version of what we've been afraid of. We'll be ready for either. He closed the notebook. Downstairs, he could hear the sounds of the building going about its morning, Haru's voice, low and practical, the scrape of furniture being moved, the particular silence of Yuki working through something at speed. The building's particular music, which had been developing since the first week and which he had stopped being able to imagine not hearing. He went downstairs. There was work to do. End of chapter 15. Blood that binds. Chapter 16, The Name in the Dark. The second approach to the Camino building happened 12 days after the first. Izuku spent those 12 days preparing in the way he prepared for everything that mattered, systematically, thoroughly, and with the particular intensity that came from knowing that insufficient preparation in this context had consequences that extended beyond himself. He mapped every documented exit point of the building. He cross-referenced Kenji's acoustic observations with the architectural records he had pulled from the city planning database, a search that had required 3 separate justifications to different municipal departments and had consumed 2 full days. He worked with Yuki on the analytical framework for identifying which of the 4 oldest was the anomaly, the one running the parallel project, the one who had assembled them. Yuki's framework was elegant and characteristically precise. The four oldest in the building had been in the organization long enough to have developed what she called behavioral signatures, patterns of decision-making that were consistent enough to be identifiable from the outside, if you knew what to look for. The anomaly, the one with the parallel agenda, would show a specific deviation from the standard organizational behavioral pattern. It would make decisions that serve the parallel project alongside decisions that serve the standard framework, and the two sets of decisions would occasionally conflict in ways that were small but legible, if you were reading carefully enough. What does the conflict look like from the outside? Izuku asked. Like inconsistency, Yuki said. Like a person who is two things simultaneously and sometimes the two things pull in different directions. She paused. The organizational standard rewards absolute consistency. Deviation is visible. Someone running a parallel project would have to be very controlled to keep the deviation small enough to avoid detection. But not invisible. Nothing is invisible to sufficient attention, Yuki said. Sufficient attention, Izuku thought. That's what this second approach is about. Getting close enough, staying long enough, for sufficient attention to find the deviation. They went on a Wednesday, at the same hour, through the same route. 8 of them this time. All 8. Izuku had spent 2 days thinking about whether to bring Yuki and had arrived at the same conclusion he had arrived at when Kenji asked to come. She was right about her usefulness, she was right about her capability, and excluding her on the grounds of age would be both incorrect and unkind. She had said nothing when he told her she was included. She had simply nodded and added the Wednesday approach to whatever internal organizational system she operated from and gone back to her analysis. They reached the first observation position at 12:50. Kenji went to the roof's edge and closed his eyes. The others arranged themselves in the positions they had developed on the first approach, Daichi in his state of focused reception, Rei at the perimeter of the rooftop preparing for a closer pass, Nami with her notebook, Yuki watching the building with the systematic attention of someone who is reading it rather than looking at it. Izuku stood at the center and watched all of them and kept his breathing steady and thought about what they were doing and what it was going to require. Sufficient attention, he thought. We are giving this sufficient attention. Kenji said, after 4 minutes. The 4 older ones. I can separate them acoustically now. I've been practicing the differentiation since the first approach, working from what I remember of their movement patterns. He paused. 3 of them are in the same upper floor room as before. One is, he tilted his head. One is on a lower floor. Moving differently from the others. More, he paused, searching for the word. More separately. Izuku looked at Yuki. Yuki was looking at the building. Which floor? She asked. Second. The room facing this direction. He paused. It's close to the east wall. The east wall, Izuku thought. The side closest to us. The same side from which something had watched them leave on the first approach. Daichi, he said quietly. Daichi's expression shifted slightly, the adjustment of someone redirecting focused attention from a broad target to a specific one. Second floor, east wall, he said. I'm looking. The rooftop was very quiet. Then Daichi said, in a voice that was careful and precise and carried something underneath the precision that Izuku had learned to hear. Different. Different how? The 3 upstairs, they have the gravity signature I described before. Structural loyalty. Pointing in the same direction. He paused. This one, he paused again. This one is pointing in 2 directions simultaneously. He was quiet for a moment. It's the most complex emotional signature I've encountered since I developed this capacity. He paused. It's like listening to 2 pieces of music playing at the same time in different keys, and somehow both of them are the same person. 2 directions simultaneously, Izuku thought. Yuki's behavioral deviation. The conflict of being 2 things at once. Is it aware of us? He asked. A long pause. Yes, Daichi said. It has been aware of us since we arrived on this rooftop. Nobody moved. Is it? Izuku started. It's not alarmed, Daichi said. He paused. It's waiting. The same quality as the broader waiting state I described before, but more specific. More personal. Like it's been waiting for this particular thing. Waiting for us, Izuku thought. It knew we would come back. It has been waiting for us to come back. He looked at the building. The one running the parallel project, he thought. The one who assembled us. Sitting in a room on the 2nd floor of the Camino building, pointing in 2 directions simultaneously, waiting for us to figure out that it's there. What are you waiting for us to do next? He looked at Rei. She looked back at him. He thought about what she had said on the first approach, that the building didn't resist, that it invited, that it felt like a door held open by something expecting you to enter on its terms. On its terms, he thought. Or on ours? Not tonight, he said, as much to himself as to the others. We're not ready yet. Ray nodded. She had not moved toward the edge. She had been waiting for his decision. What do we need to be ready? Nami asked. She was writing in her notebook without looking at it, her eyes on the building. We need to know how to communicate with it, Izuku said, without going in. We need a way to make contact on our terms. How? Kenji asked. Izuku looked at the building. It knows we're here, he thought. It has been watching us for weeks. It knows Sora's drawings and the rooftop observations and the fact that we came back. It knows everything we've been doing because it designed the conditions for us to do it. If it can watch us, it can read us. And if it can read us. It's been communicating with us already, Yuki said. Everyone looked at her. She was still looking at the building. The Sora sightings, she said. The figure at the window, the figure at the roofline, the progressive appearances in the drawings. Those weren't surveillance. She paused. Those were messages. It has been letting us see it, incrementally, as a form of communication. Each sighting slightly more visible than the last. She paused. It's been saying, I'm here. I'm not hiding. I want to be found. The rooftop was very quiet. I want to be found, Izuku thought. He looked at the building for a long time. Then he said. Then we find it. The method was Yuki's idea, and it was characteristically precise. If the entity in the Camino building had been communicating through visibility, through allowing itself to be seen in incrementally less concealed ways, then the response in the same language was to be incrementally more visible in return. To make it clear that the message had been received and that the receiver was willing to meet. We let it see us seeing it, Yuki said. We go back to the first observation position. We stay visible on the rooftop. We don't observe, we present. We make it clear we're there, that we know it's there, and that we're open to what comes next. What comes next being what? Nami asked. I don't know yet, Yuki said. But whatever it is will be on terms that both parties have chosen. Which is better than what we have now. They went back the following night. They stood on the rooftop and they were visible. Not carelessly, not in a way that the other three older ones in the building would register as an intrusion, because Kenji kept his attention on the upper floor and reported their continued stability. But visible to the second floor, visible to the room on the east wall, visible to whatever was in there waiting. They stood there for 20 minutes. Nothing happened. They went back the night after. They stood on the rooftop for 20 minutes. Nothing happened. On the third night, as they were preparing to leave, Kenji said. The one on the second floor is moving. Everyone stilled. Toward the east wall, Kenji said. He paused. It's standing at the window. Izuku looked at the building. From the rooftop, at this distance, the windows of the second floor were dark rectangles offering nothing. But something in his peripheral vision, the edge of his attention, the register that had been developing for months into its own kind of sense, registered something at the second floor window that was not quite absence. Sora, he said quietly. She had her sketchbook open before he finished saying her name. She drew for 30 seconds, fast and certain, the way she drew when she was recording something immediate. Then she held up the sketchbook. The figure at the window was rendered in the specific way she rendered these figures, mostly shadow, mostly suggestion, with enough particular detail to make it distinct from the others she had drawn. But there was something different about this one. In every previous drawing, the figure had been turned toward the building or toward the street or toward the city. This one was turned outward. Toward the rooftop. Toward them. And in the rendering, in the suggestion of the face, the angle of attention, there was something that Sora had captured with the accuracy she brought to everything she drew. Something that was not the structured loyalty of the organization or the cold purpose of the recruitment figure in the Tatooine district. Something that looked, if you knew what to look for, like recognition. It knows us, Izuku thought. Not just that we exist. It knows us specifically. The 8 people on this rooftop. It knows who we are. He looked at the figure in the window, or the space where the figure was, the dark rectangle that offered nothing except the sense of being looked at by something that knew it was being looked at back. Tomorrow night, he said. I go alone. The argument lasted 2 hours and was conducted, with characteristic efficiency, primarily by Yuki and Nami simultaneously, which meant it was conducted at a level of analytical precision that Izuku found both impressive and exhausting. Yuki's position, going alone was an unnecessary risk. The information gathering value of multiple observers outweighed the potential communication benefit of a single approach, and the decision was based on an emotional response to the recognition in the figure's posture rather than a rational assessment of the options. Nami's position, the numbers supported caution. The single point dependency of Izuku to the facility's function made his individual risk unacceptably high, and any approach should involve at minimum Daichi for emotional topology reading and Kenji for acoustic coverage. Izuku's position, whatever was in that building had designed the conditions of this encounter and was operating on a logic he did not yet fully understand, and the one thing he was certain of was that it had been watching him specifically for long enough to recognize him on a rooftop in the dark, and that whatever communication it was attempting to initiate was addressed to him. It chose me as the convergence point, he said. Whatever it wants to say it to me. Yuki and Nami looked at each other. Daichi comes, Nami said. Daichi comes, Izuku agreed. And Kenji stays on the rooftop for acoustic coverage. And Kenji stays on the rooftop. And if anything goes wrong, Daichi reads it before it happens and we leave, Izuku said. That's not a guarantee. But it's a real mitigation. Yuki looked at him for a long moment. You know this is what it expected, she said. Yes, Izuku said. And you're going anyway. Because not going is also what it expected, Izuku said. Or not going indefinitely is. At some point I have to make a move. And the move it's been angling toward is this one. He paused. If someone designed the conditions for this encounter, they designed them around who I am. And who I am is someone who doesn't stay on the rooftop when there's someone in the building who wants to talk. Yuki was quiet for a moment. Then she said, document everything afterward. Verbatim if possible. Always, Izuku said. Chapter 17, Contact. They went the following night. 3 of them, Izuku, Daichi, and Kenji. The others had argued for larger numbers and had accepted the final 3 with the specific reluctant acceptance of people who recognize they've lost the argument but want it noted that they lost it under protest. Haru had said, at the door, in the tone of someone making a structural observation rather than an emotional appeal, come back. That's the plan, Izuku said. Good, Haru said. Stick to it. They moved through the Camino district in the particular silence of 3 transformed individuals who had been working together for months and had developed the coordination that comes from that. Kenji moved slightly ahead, his sensory attention extended outward in the way he had learned to direct it, a living early warning system. Daichi moved beside Izuku with the measured pace of someone in a state of ongoing reception, the emotional weather of the city arriving at him continuously and being processed with the 41 years of experience he brought to processing difficult things. They reached the Camino building at 1 a.m. Not the rooftop this time. The street level. They stood on the opposite pavement and looked at the building. It was the same as it had always been, the featureless concrete facade, the dark windows, the quality of something presenting nothing to look at and therefore being very easy not to look at. But Izuku had been looking at it for long enough now that the camouflage had worn through, and what he saw was a building that was fully alive, fully occupied, fully aware of him standing on the pavement across from it. The upper floor, Kenji said quietly. The 3 older ones are in the same configuration as before. Stable. Not responding to our presence. He paused. The second floor. The one we've been watching. It's moved to the ground floor. Izuku looked at the building. Ground floor, he thought. It came down. The door, Daichi said, very quietly. Izuku looked at the door. It was at the center of the building's ground floor facade, plain, metal, the same unremarkable quality as the rest of the exterior. As he watched, it opened. Not all the way. A fraction. Enough to indicate that it was open. Enough to indicate that the opening was deliberate. On its terms or mine, Izuku thought. That's the question. Every time. He crossed the street. He stopped at the door. He could feel Daichi 2 steps behind him, present and receiving. He could feel Kenji somewhere at his back, acoustic attention extended to full range, monitoring everything. He put his hand on the door. This is what it expected, Yuki had said. Yes, he thought. And I'm going anyway. Because this is who I am. Because whatever is behind this door assembled 8 people around me and has been watching me for months and wants to say something. And the only way to find out what it is to listen. He pushed the door open and went in. The ground floor of the Camino building was dark and cold. Izuku's eyes adjusted immediately, which was something he had become accustomed to over months of late patrols, and what he saw in the adjusted dark was a space that was the inverse of the facility, the same industrial bones, the same concrete and structural columns, but stripped of everything that made a space inhabited. No furniture. No lighting along the baseboards. No supply shelves, no folding table, no evidence of the specific human effort of making a place livable. Just the raw space, and the dark, and the particular quality of a building that had been occupied for a very long time by something that did not require the accommodations of ordinary life. He was not alone in the space. The figure was at the far end of the room, standing with its back to the wall in a posture that was neither threatening nor welcoming, simply present, in the absolute stillness that Izuku had learned to associate with the oldest of them. In the dark he could not see it clearly. He could see the general shape, taller than average, lean, with the particular quality of economy in the posture that suggested something that had long since shed every unnecessary gesture. And the eyes. The specific quality of light in the eyes that was not the same luminescence as the newly transformed, not the bewildered glow of someone still catching up to what they were. Something older. Something that had been a long time in the dark and had learned to see there. Izuku did not activate One for All. He stood at the doorway, visible, and he said, "I'm here." A silence. Then the figure said, "I know." The voice was not what he had expected. He had been braced for something like the voice of the recruiting figure in the Taduan district, the deep water quality, the voice formed over a very long time. This was different. Still old in register, still carrying something that human voices did not carry after only a few decades, but not cold. Not the voice of something that had forgotten warmth. The voice of something that had chosen to remember it. "You assembled us," Izuku said. "Yes." "Why?" A pause. The figure moved, not toward him, just a shift of weight, a reorientation. Even that small movement carried the absolute economy of something very old. "Because something is coming," it said. "Something that the organization I have been part of for longer than you can easily imagine has been building toward, and that cannot be countered from inside the organization." He paused. "And because I have been watching this city for a long time, and watching the ways that power concentrates and is used, and I needed something outside the structure. Something built on a different principle." "What principle?" "Choice," the figure said. "The organization operates on structural loyalty, you've seen that, your observer described it well. Gravity. People who follow because following has become the architecture of their existence." He paused. "That structure is very strong. It has been building for centuries and it is almost complete." He paused. "But it has a specific vulnerability. Something built on the removal of choice has no defense against something built on the presence of it. Against people who choose their allegiances rather than having them installed." Izuku was quiet for a moment. "You've been building us as a weapon," he said. "I've been building you as a counter," the figure said. "There's a difference. A weapon is a tool without agency. What you've built in that industrial building 3 kilometers from here, that is not a tool." He paused. "That is something I could not have designed. I designed the conditions. What emerged from them is entirely yours. The design doesn't own the building," Haru had said. "What is coming?" Izuku asked. The figure was quiet for a moment. "The organization has been building toward a specific threshold," it said. "A number of transformed individuals across a sufficient number of cities, distributed in the right types and ratios, to constitute a functioning parallel society. Self-sufficient, self-governing, no longer dependent on concealment or the tolerance of human institutions." He paused. "When the threshold is reached, and it will be reached, in this city, within months, the concealment ends. They go public. They impose," the figure said. "That's the better word. The threshold is not a moment of revelation. It is a moment of sufficient power to make revelation unnecessary, because at that point the question of whether the human world accepts their existence becomes irrelevant." He paused. "They will be strong enough that acceptance or rejection is not a variable they need to account for." The room was very quiet. Months, Izuku thought. The waiting state Daichi described. The uniform anticipation pointing in the same direction. This is what they're waiting for. The threshold. The moment of sufficient power. "How many months?" he asked. 4. Perhaps 5, if the Musetafu cell's recruitment pace slows. He paused. "It will not slow." "What does Kurogane want from that moment?" Another pause. "Longer this time." "You've found that name," the figure said. It was not quite surprise. Not quite anything that simple. 2 mentions in case files 15 years apart, Izuku said. "It's not much. But it's a thread." Kurogane, the figure said, wants what every architect of a long project wants when the project is complete. He paused. "To see it stand." He paused again. "Kurogane has been building this for 400 years. He paused. "It would like, after 400 years, to stop building and simply exist. 400 years, Izuku thought. He had known the organization was old. He had known it was old enough to predate the Quirk era, old enough to have been operating in this country before the frameworks that now define the world had existed. But 400 years was a different order of oldness. 400 years was a category of time that changed the nature of the thing operating within it. Is Kurogane here? He asked, in this city. No, the figure said. Not yet. He paused. But it will come when the threshold is reached. It always comes at the threshold. What happens if we prevent the threshold? Then it will not come, the figure said. And the process will begin again elsewhere. He paused. Kurogane is patient. 400 years of patience is not easily exhausted. So preventing it here just moves it somewhere else. Unless, the figure said, preventing it here is part of something larger. Unless what happens in this city in the next 4 months becomes something that changes the terms of the larger question. He paused. That is what I have been building toward. Not prevention of the threshold in Musetafu. Prevention of the threshold everywhere. He paused. Which requires something that can reach Kurogane directly when it comes. Izuku looked at the figure in the dark. Something that can reach Kurogane directly, he thought. 8 people built on the principle of choice, operating outside the organizational structure, positioned in the city where the threshold will first be reached, waiting for the moment Kurogane arrives. That's what we are. That's what we were assembled to be. A weapon for one specific target. Who are you? He asked. The figure was quiet for a moment. Then it said. My name is Senri. I have been in this organization for 230 years. He paused. And I have been waiting, for most of that time, for the circumstances that would allow me to do what I have been doing for the past 6 months. 230 years, Izuku thought. 230 years inside the structure that was building toward a threshold that would change the world, waiting for the conditions to build something that could stop it. Why now? He asked, why, after 230 years, are the circumstances right now? Senri was quiet for a moment. Because of you, it said simply. I have been watching this city for a long time. I have watched many people respond to what I allowed them to see. Most of them ran. Many of them reported to the agencies and were ignored or managed. He paused. You built a shelter. The room was very quiet. I have been waiting, Senri said, for someone who would build a shelter instead of a weapon. Because the only thing that can counter what Kurogane has built is something that was built with an entirely different intention. He paused. Something that knows what it is and why it exists and chooses to be what it is, rather than following because the alternative was removed. He paused. That is what you have built. He paused. That is what I have been waiting for. Izuku stood in the dark of the Camino building's ground floor and looked at the figure of something 230 years old that had been watching him build a shelter and had seen, in that shelter, the conditions for a counter to 400 years of patient construction. The design doesn't own the building, he thought. But the design understood something about what the building needed to be. What do you need from us? He asked. Right now? Senri said. Nothing. He paused. Keep building. Keep choosing. Keep being what you are. He paused. When the time comes, when Kurogane arrives, I will reach out. How? You'll know, Senri said. You've been learning to read the signals for months. Izuku thought about Sora's drawings. About the figure at the window, incrementally more visible. About the door left open a fraction. You'll know. One more question, he said. Yes. The 8 of us. The ones you assembled. He paused. Are we enough? Senri was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, it said finally. That depends on what you become in the next 4 months. He paused. But I have watched 230 years of what the organization builds, and I have watched 6 months of what you build, and I know which one I would rather face an unknown future with. The figure moved. Not toward the door, deeper into the building, back toward the dark, back toward whatever it was when it was not standing in a ground floor room talking to a 22-year-old hero with a notebook. Senri, Izuku said. The figure stopped. Are you safe? In there? A pause that lasted longer than it needed to. Safer than I have been in a long time, Senri said. Now that someone outside knows I exist. It moved into the dark and was gone. Izuku stood for a moment in the empty ground floor of the Camino building, with the cold and the dark and the sound of his own heartbeat, which was the loudest thing in the room. Then he turned and walked back out into the street. Daichi was waiting 2 steps from the door, exactly where he had been. He looked at Izuku for a moment. Then he said, quietly. 230 years is a very long time to wait. You could hear? I could feel, Daichi said, the emotional signature of what was in that room. He paused. When it said it had been waiting for the conditions to exist, the weight of the waiting that came with those words, he stopped. I have felt grief before. In people, in spaces, in the residue of things that happened long ago. He paused. What I felt in that room was the longest grief I have ever encountered. The grief of something that has been patient about something impossibly difficult for an impossibly long time. Izuku looked at the building. Is it trustworthy? He asked. Daichi was quiet for a long moment. I don't know if trustworthy is the right category, he said finally. It is genuinely what it says it is. It genuinely wants what it says it wants. He paused. But 230 years in a structure like that one, even if you've been working against it from the inside, changes things. He paused. It is not what we are. It is not built the way we are built. He looked at Izuku. That doesn't mean its interests and ours don't align. It means we should understand the alignment clearly and not assume it extends further than it does. Useful, Izuku said. But not unconditional. Useful, Daichi agreed. But not unconditional. Kenji appeared from the shadows of the adjacent building, where he had maintained his acoustic watch. The three upstairs didn't register any of that, he said. No change in movement pattern. No alert response. He paused. Whatever soundproofing is in that ground floor room, it worked. It planned for that, Izuku thought. Of course it did. 230 years of operating inside the organization. It knows exactly what the three upstairs can hear and has made the ground floor room unreadable to them. Let's go, he said. They moved through the Camino district back toward the facility, and the building behind them settled back into its held breath quality, and somewhere in its upper floors 43 transformed individuals continued to wait for a threshold that was 4 months away, and on the second floor a figure with 230 years of patient grief resumed whatever it was when it was not building counters to 4-century projects. 4 months, Izuku thought, walking. We have 4 months. Chapter 18, What 4 months means. He told the group everything the next morning. Not the managed version. Not the calibrated delivery. Everything, in the order it had happened, with the full weight of each component allowed to land as it landed. They sat through it in the particular quality of attention that the group brought to important things, complete and without interruption, each person receiving it in their own register. Haru with his practical stillness. Kenji writing in his notebook, which Izuku had stopped finding surprising. Sora drawing something small in the corner of a sketchbook page, the visual thinking happening alongside the verbal reception. Rei with her absolute attention. Daichi nodding occasionally, very slightly, at the points where Izuku's account aligned with what he had felt in the ground floor room. Nami building a framework in her head that he could see in the quality of her stillness. Takeshi, present and steady. Yuki, already 3 steps ahead. When he finished, Yuki said. 4 months. Yes. What does the threshold require specifically? Numbers, types, distribution? I don't have those specifics yet. Senri described it as a number across sufficient cities in the right types and ratios. Then we need the specifics, Yuki said. Because you can't prevent a threshold you can't define. She paused. We need another conversation with Senri. With better questions prepared in advance. Agreed. We also need, she said, to think carefully about what preventing the threshold in Musitafu actually requires. If it's a numbers problem, if the cell needs to reach a certain count to cross the threshold, then the solution involves either reducing the count or preventing new additions. She paused. Both of those options have implications. Reducing the count, Izuku thought. 43 people in that building, most of whom were transformed without consent and have been in a structural loyalty system long enough that the loyalty has become gravity. Reducing the count doesn't mean what it would mean in a standard hero operation. It means getting them out, he said. Everyone looked at him. Not fighting them, he said. Not containing them. Getting them out. Offering them what we were offered, a place, a choice, an alternative. He paused. 43 people who were made without being asked, who are following because following has become structural. If we can offer them the structure we've built instead. Some of them will be too far in, Nami said carefully. The structural loyalty Daichi described, for some of them it won't be loyalty anymore. It will be identity. Offering an alternative to people for whom the alternative is incomprehensible isn't the same as offering it to people who can still imagine choosing. I know, Izuku said. Not all 43. But some. Maybe many. He paused. We won't know until we try. And the 4 oldest ones, Takeshi said. The hierarchy. They're not going to let us walk in and offer their people an exit. No, Izuku said. They're not. So there's a conflict, Takeshi said. He said it plainly, without drama, the way he said most things. At some point there's a conflict. Yes, Izuku said. I think there is. The room sat with that for a moment. A conflict, Izuku thought. He's right. Whatever we build toward over the next 4 months, whatever the strategy for preventing the threshold, there is going to be a point at which the organization pushes back. At which the 4 oldest in the building look at what we're doing and decide that our counterstructure is a threat that requires a response. And we need to be ready for that. How do we get ready? Haru asked. He was looking at Izuku with the practical assessment that was his primary mode of engagement with problems. Practically. What does being ready look like? Several things, Izuku said. We grow. We need more people, more of the transformed who don't fit the organizational pattern, who choose this over the alternative. He paused. We build a relationship with Senri until we understand exactly what the threshold requires and exactly what it needs from us when Kurogane arrives. He paused. We develop our capabilities. Each of us individually, and all of us collectively. He looked around the room. We've been managing. We need to move past managing. What does that look like? Rei asked. For each of you, something different, Izuku said. For Rei, the wall permeability needs to be reliable and controlled, not intermittent. Dr. Sato has a theory about the emotional state dependency. We work on that. For Kenji, the range and the precision of the acoustic attention. For Daichi, the emotional topology reading at distance, from multiple subjects simultaneously. For Yuki, he paused. Yuki is already operating at a level I can barely track. She knows what she needs. Yuki nodded once, without expression. For Haru and Takeshi, he continued, the physical capacity is already significant. But physical capacity without tactical coordination is limited. He paused. We need to work on coordination. On operating as a unit. And you? Sora asked. She was looking at him with her direct, unornamented attention. What do you develop? What do I develop? Izuku thought. That's the question I've been avoiding. Because the answer is complicated by the fact that I am the only one in this building without a transformation. I am the only one who is still entirely human, still operating within the standard parameters of what a person with one for all can do. I am the center of a counterstructure built on transformed individuals and I am the only untransformed individual in it. What do I develop? Understanding, he said. I develop understanding. Of what you are, of what Senri is, of what the organization is, of what Kurogane is. He paused. And I develop the ability to act as a bridge. Between all of you and the human world that doesn't know this is happening. Between Senri and the 8 of us. Between what we are and what we need to become. Sora looked at him for a moment. Then she said, quietly. That's very lonely work. He looked at her. Yes, he thought. It is. It has been, since the beginning. The only human in a building full of transformed individuals, the only one operating without the particular knowledge that transformation brings, the only one who can't fully understand from the inside what the others are navigating because I am navigating something adjacent to it but fundamentally different. It's the work that needs doing, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she opened her sketchbook and began to draw. The 4 months began. In the way that important periods of time always begin, not with a dramatic marker, not with the clear line of a before and an after, but with the continuation of the ordinary work of the days, each day adding to the one before it, the accumulation of small things building towards something that would only be visible in retrospect. Dr. Sato came weekly. The compound was refined for individual metabolisms, the hunger becoming more manageable for all of them over the weeks, the edges worn smooth by the repeated practice of choosing against it. Rei's wall permeability began to stabilize, not fully reliable yet, not able to be activated at will in all circumstances, but the conditions under which it failed became more predictable and therefore more manageable. Kenji extended his acoustic range and learned to separate and identify individual sound signatures at distances that had seemed impossible in the early weeks. Daichi developed the ability to read emotional topology across the building simultaneously, a kind of ambient awareness that he described as having a second set of eyes that operated continuously in the background. Haru and Kenji finished the second floor renovation and started on the third, which meant the workspace got reorganized, which meant the wall got reorganized, which was overdue. Takeshi, one afternoon in the 4th week of the 4 months, asked Izuku to train with him. It was not a request Izuku had anticipated. Takeshi was Category 2, physical dominant, enhanced strength and speed, and the gap between his physical capacity and Izuku's, even with one for all, was significant. Training together would require Izuku to use one for all at a level he had been keeping deliberately low in the facility, conscious of the building's structural limitations. But Takeshi's face when he asked had the quality of someone who had been working up to something for a long time and had finally gotten there, and Izuku recognized that quality and said yes. They went to the cleared ground floor at midnight, when the building was quiet, and Takeshi looked at Izuku with the direct steadiness that had replaced his early wariness over months of the facility's rhythms. "I need to know what I can do," Takeshi said. "Precisely. Not approximately. I've been calibrating alone since I got here, but I don't actually know my parameters." He paused. "I can't fight something I don't understand, and I need to understand myself first." He's been thinking about the conflict, Izuku thought. Since the morning gathering when I said yes, there's going to be a conflict. He's been thinking about it and he's been preparing for it in the way he prepares for everything, by going toward the difficulty rather than away from it. "Okay," Izuku said. "Let's find out." They worked for 2 hours. Izuku pushed one for all to 30% and found that Takeshi could match him at that level in terms of speed if not power, which was remarkable and which he filed carefully. He observed Takeshi's fighting instincts, raw, self-taught, built from 6 days of running and the subsequent months of contained energy, and noted what they were and what they weren't. They pushed against each other carefully, both conscious of the building's limits, both operating in the register of finding out rather than winning. Afterward, Takeshi sat on the ground floor with his knees pulled up and his breathing steady and said, "Thank you." "You're good," Izuku said. "Your instincts are sound. You need tactical structure but the foundation is there." Takeshi was quiet for a moment. "I was running for 6 days," he said. "I keep thinking about those 6 days." He paused. "If you hadn't found me, if this place didn't exist, where would I be now?" "In the Camino building," Izuku thought. Pointing in the same direction as 43 others. "Waiting for the threshold. Gravity where choice should be." "You found this place," Izuku said. "I found you on the steps, but you found this place." He paused. "Don't give me more credit than that." Takeshi looked at him. "Why do you do that?" he asked. "Redistribute the credit." "Because it matters who built what," Izuku said. "The things you've built, the capacity you've developed, the choice you keep making, what you've become in this building, those are yours. If I take credit for them I diminish them." Takeshi looked at the floor for a moment. "My mother used to say," he said, "that the best teachers are the ones who make you feel like you figured it out yourself." He paused. "I used to think that was just a nice thing people said." He paused. "I don't think that anymore." Izuku looked at him. He thought about Daichi and 17 years of students and the best teachers he'd known himself. "Get some sleep," he said. "Yeah," Takeshi said. He didn't move immediately. He sat on the ground floor of the facility in the low light, in the building he had found after 6 days of running, and he looked at the space around him, the shelves that Haru had built, the furniture arranged for people rather than for storage, the evidence everywhere of the specific human effort of making a place livable, and his face had the quality of someone who has arrived somewhere and knows it. Izuku left him there and went upstairs. Chapter 19, New Arrivals. In the second month of the 4, they found 3 more. The first was a woman named Aiko Senda, 34, a middle school science teacher from the Naruhata district. She had been transformed 11 days before Izuku found her, and she had spent those 11 days doing what teachers do, systematically researching what had happened to her, building a framework for understanding it, and then, when the framework was sufficient, deciding what to do next. She knocked on the door. Not the careful, terrified arrival of the earliest residents. Not the accidental landing through a window. She knocked on the door at 9 in the evening, which was before the building went quiet, and when Izuku opened it she said, "I've been watching this building for 4 days. I think you're doing what I think you're doing." She paused. "I'd like to help." Izuku looked at her. "Come in," he said. She came in and assessed the space and the people in it with the rapid, organized attention of a scientist taking stock of a new environment, and within 20 minutes she had identified Yuki as the person she most needed to talk to and had seated herself across from her with the purposeful quality of someone who had brought something specific and was ready to exchange it. Yuki looked at her. "You've been researching the physiology," Yuki said. "For 11 days, Aiko said. "I have a science background. I needed a framework." She looked at Yuki steadily. "You have something I don't have, though." "What's that?" "Time," Aiko said. "You've been here longer. You've been building the analytical structure longer." She paused. "I want to contribute to that." Yuki looked at her for a long moment. "What's your specific area?" she asked. "Chemistry and biology. The mechanism of the transformation at a cellular level." She paused. I think I've identified something about the hunger response that your compound addresses symptomatically but not causally. Yuki was quiet for a moment. Then she said, show me. Izuku left them to it. He had learned, over months, that the best thing he could do when the group found its own momentum was to get out of the way of it. The second arrival was different. His name was Ren Fujiwara and he was 19 and he had been on the streets for 3 weeks when Kenji found him. Not found in the way Izuku found people, through late-night patrols and the careful approach. Found in the acoustic sense, which was the way Kenji increasingly found things. He had been doing a perimeter sweep of the industrial district at 11 at night, maintaining the regular surveillance that had become part of the facility's routine, and he had heard something in the building 2 streets over, a heartbeat pattern he recognized as transformed, and underneath it the specific acoustic texture he had learned to associate with hunger that was past the point of easy management. He came back to the facility and told Izuku. They went together, quickly. Ren was in the building's basement, a maintenance space, cold and dark, crouched in the corner with his hands pressed flat against the concrete floor and his eyes shut and his jaw set with the visible effort of someone holding something back through pure force of will. He did not look up when they came in. I know what you are, he said, through his teeth. I can hear both of you. I can hear your heartbeats. He paused, and the pause cost him something visible. I'm not going to hurt you, but you need to give me a minute. Take whatever you need, Izuku said. They waited. 3 minutes passed. Then Ren's hands came off the floor and he sat back against the wall and opened his eyes and looked at them with the exhausted steadiness of someone who has been holding something back for a long time and has just managed it one more time. I've been managing, he said. For 3 weeks. He paused. I'm very tired. I know, Izuku said. Let's go somewhere warm. Ren looked at Kenji. You're like me, he said. Yes, Kenji said. Are there others? Kenji said. 11 with you. Something in Ren's face moved, a shift that started in the eyes and worked its way out through an expression that had been braced against itself for 3 weeks and was now, cautiously, beginning to relax. 11, he said. 11, Kenji confirmed. Ren stood up from the floor. He was unsteady for a moment, the specific unsteadiness of someone whose body has been running on almost nothing for 3 weeks, and then he found his balance and straightened. Okay, he said. Let's go. The third was the most complicated. Her name was Mira, and she was the first person they found who had been to the Camino building and left. She appeared at the perimeter of the industrial district on a Thursday afternoon, which was unusual because they didn't usually encounter the transformed in daylight hours in this district, and she appeared in a way that suggested she had been circling the facility for some time before Sora spotted her from the high window on the 2nd floor. Sora drew her immediately. The drawing showed a woman in her late 20s standing at the corner of the street, looking at the facility with the particular quality of someone who is trying to decide whether to approach. She had the luminescent quality in her eyes. She had the stillness. But unlike the stillness of the newly transformed, which was the stillness of something that hadn't learned to move differently yet, or the stillness of Senri, which was the absolute stillness of something very old, this was the stillness of someone who had learned stillness as a practice and was using it to contain something very active underneath. Sora brought the drawing downstairs. Izuku looked at it and then at Nami, who was looking at the drawing with the expression she wore when numbers were arriving in a pattern she hadn't anticipated. She's been in the building, Nami said. How do you know? The posture, Nami said. The way she's standing relative to this building versus the way the others have stood when they first approach. She's comparing. She's standing here and comparing it to somewhere else she's been. Somewhere else she's been, Izuku thought. He went upstairs to the high window and looked. The woman was still at the corner. She was looking at the facility with an expression that was too complex to read from this distance, but that contained, even across this distance, the quality that Daichi had described in the ground floor of the Camino building, something pointing in 2 directions simultaneously. He went back downstairs. I'm going to go talk to her, he said. Alone? Haru asked. Just to the corner, Izuku said. Everyone stays inside. He went out through the front door and walked to the corner of the street. The woman watched him come. She did not move. She held her ground with the stillness she had learned somewhere, and when Izuku stopped a few meters from her she looked at him with the eyes that contained too much, the luminescent quality, and underneath it the 2 directions, the comparison, the active thing underneath the stillness. You're the hero, she said. It was what Yuki had said. Almost the same words. Yes, Izuku said. I was in the Camino building for 3 weeks, she said. I left 5 days ago. Izuku looked at her. How? He asked. The building is designed for permeability inward, not outward. I know, she said. It took me most of the 3 weeks to find the way. She paused. I'm Category 4. Environmental dominant, Izuku thought. Like Rei. The ability to interact with physical space differently, to move through surfaces and boundaries. Rei, he thought. The way through that building is the same way in and out. Why did you leave? He asked. The woman was quiet for a moment. Because I could, she said. And then, she paused. Because I heard something. In the building. One of the older ones talking to another. She paused. They mentioned this facility. She met Izuku's eyes. They know exactly where you are. They know how many of you there are. They know the names of the ones who left before the standard rollout found them. They know, Izuku thought. Of course they know. Senri told us they know. The shadow at Sora's window, the figure at the roofline, they've been watching for months. What are they planning to do about it? He asked. She was quiet for a long moment. Nothing yet, she said. The instruction from above is to let it develop. To watch and wait. He paused. But the threshold is 4 months away, and when it arrives, the instruction changes. What is the instruction change to? She met his eyes. Assimilation or elimination, she said. Those are the 2 options on the table for after the threshold. He paused. Either you join the structure or you stop existing as an alternative to it. The street was very quiet. Assimilation or elimination, Izuku thought. 4 months. When the threshold arrives, the watching and waiting ends. Come inside, he said. She looked at the building for a moment. Then she said, my name is Mira. I'm Izuku. I know, she said. They described you in some detail. He looked at her. Is the description accurate? She considered him. More or less, she said. They said you were stubborn and you didn't stop asking questions and you were building something you didn't fully understand. She paused. 2 out of 3. Which 2? You're stubborn, she said. And you don't stop asking questions. She looked at the building. But I think you understand what you're building better than they give you credit for. She walked past him toward the facility. He stood on the corner for a moment, looking at the street, the ordinary city street in the ordinary city, full of people who didn't know what was moving beneath it. Assimilation or elimination, he thought. 4 months. He followed Mira inside. Chapter 20, The Shape of What's Coming. 12 people now. Izuku stood at the revised wall on a Tuesday morning and looked at the 12 pins on the map and the expanded classification system and the timeline that Yuki had drafted and pinned beside it, a careful, precise rendering of the 4 months ahead, marked with the information they had and the questions they still needed to answer. 12 people. 8 weeks ago it had been 8. Now it was 12, and the 4 new arrivals had each brought something that had changed the shape of what the facility was and what it could do. Aiko's scientific analysis, already deepening the understanding of the hunger mechanism in ways that would take months to fully develop. Ren's Category 2 physicality, which gave the facility a second person with the specific capabilities that Haru and Takeshi had been developing, and which meant that the physical capacity of the group had increased significantly. Myra's Category 4 environmental dominance and her knowledge of the interior of the Camino building, which was worth more in planning terms than anything else they had gained in 2 months. And what Mira had brought in information. Assimilation or elimination. 4 months. He had told everyone immediately, because that was what he did. He had told them in the morning gathering the day after Mira arrived, and he had watched their faces and had seen, in each of them, the specific adjustment of someone who has known something was coming and is now looking at the shape of it more clearly. Takeshi had said, good. Now we know what we're preparing for. Haru had said, 4 months is enough time to be ready. Yuki had said nothing. She had started writing. Now, 2 weeks later, Izuku stood at the wall and looked at what 12 weeks of building had produced and thought about what 4 more months needed to produce, and the gap between those 2 things was both encouraging and frightening in equal measure. The door opened. Yuki came in without knocking. She had stopped knocking at the workspace weeks ago, which he had accepted as a reasonable adjustment, and sat in the second chair and put a folder on the desk. Threshold specifics, she said. He turned from the wall. From Senri? From my analysis of the organizational rollout data combined with what Mira brought from the Camino building. She opened the folder. The threshold requires 312 transformed individuals across 16 cities, distributed in specific type ratios. She showed him the page. Musitafu is one of the 16. The current count in Musitafu is 43. The threshold for this city is 60. 60, Izuku said. At the current recruitment pace, approximately 4 new transformations per week, they reach 60 in approximately 4 weeks. She paused. The other 15 cities are at various stages. Some are further ahead. Some behind. He paused. The global threshold is reached when all 16 cities are at their local threshold simultaneously. She looked up at him. Which is why Kurogane is coming here. Musetafu is the slowest of the 16. When Musetafu reaches 60, the threshold is complete. Musetafu is the last city, Izuku thought. The slowest. The lagging one. 4 weeks to 60, then Kurogane arrives. 4 weeks. That's not 4 months, he said. No, Yuki said. My original estimate was based on incomplete data. She paused. I'm sorry. The revision is significant. 4 weeks, Izuku thought. Not 4 months. 4 weeks. He sat down. He looked at the wall. At the 12 pins, the timeline, the questions, the blank circle at the center that had long since been filled with Sora's drawing and then with the name Kurogane and then with Senri's face as Sora had rendered it from what Izuku had described, and which looked back at him with the 230 years of patient grief that Daichi had felt in the ground floor. 4 weeks. Okay, he said. Yuki looked at him. Okay? She said. Yes, Izuku said. Okay. He looked at her. We have 12 people in 4 weeks and a clearer picture of what's coming than we had yesterday. He paused. That's more than we had when we started with nothing and 6 weeks and no picture at all. Yuki looked at him for a long moment. You know this is going to be a fight, she said. Not a patrol, not an approach, not a careful observation from a rooftop. A fight. Yes, Izuku said. We have 12 people. They have 43. We have 12 people who chose to be here, Izuku said. They have 43 who are following because following has become structural. He paused. Those are not equivalent forces. The design doesn't own the building, he thought. But sometimes the builder has to defend it. Yuki looked at him with the reading attention she brought to everything. You're afraid, she said. Yes, Izuku said. Good, she said. Fear is appropriate data. She closed the folder. What do we do first? He looked at the wall. First, he thought. First we tell everyone. Then we contact Senri. Then we plan, with 12 people in 4 weeks and the full picture of what we're walking toward, as clearly as we can see it. And then we walk toward it. First, he said, we call a gathering. He stood up. Not just the morning kind, he said. A real one. Everything on the table. He went to the door. Yuki, he said. She looked up. You found this, he said. The threshold specifics, the timeline, the real shape of it. You built the framework that got us here. He paused. I want you to present it. Not me. You. She looked at him for a moment. Why? Because you did the work, he said. And because the group should know who to trust with the analysis. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stood, picked up the folder, and walked past him to the door. Come on then, she said. They went downstairs together. The 12 people of the facility were scattered through the ground floor and the second floor in the patterns of a Tuesday morning, Haru and Ren on the second floor with a construction project, Aiko and Rei at the table with Aiko's cellular analysis, Sora in her corner, Kenji studying, Nami with her numbers, Takeshi sitting with Mira who was still orienting herself to the group's rhythms, Daichi in his chair with his reading glasses and his folded hands. Izuku stood at the bottom of the stairs. Everyone, he said. Can we gather? They came together in the ground floor with the ease of people who had been gathering for months, arranging themselves in the familiar configuration that had become the shape of the group's collective attention. He looked at them. 12 people. Each of them a specific, unrepeatable person who had been transformed without consent and had chosen, when offered the alternative, to be here. Each of them carrying something enormous with a quality of grace that he still found difficult to look at directly because it was so much more than he had designed for or hoped for. The design doesn't own the building, he thought. But the building needs to know what's coming. Yuki has something to tell you, he said. Listen carefully. Yuki stood in the center of the room with her folder and 12 people looking at her, and she opened the folder and began to speak, and the shape of what was coming arrived in the ground floor of the facility with the quiet certainty of a thing that had been true before anyone knew it. 4 weeks. The threshold. Kurogane. Outside, Musetafu ran on, indifferent and unknowing. Inside the facility, 12 people who had been made for someone else's purpose sat in the light and heard the shape of what they were going to face and chose, one more time, the same choice they had been making every day since they arrived. To be here. To be what they had built. To be ready. End of chapter 20. Blood that binds. Chapter 21. The weight of weeks. The 4 weeks reordered everything. Not dramatically, not with the kind of dramatic reorganization that announces itself clearly, that comes with an obvious before and after. The kind that happens in the margins of days, in the accumulation of small adjustments, in the way people move through a space when they know that the space has a horizon and the horizon is close. Izuku noticed it first in the mornings. The gathering had always been 20 minutes. In the week after Yuki's presentation it became 30, then 40, not because anyone extended it deliberately but because nobody was moving to end it. The conversations that had always been ordinary, food, the day's work, the small navigations of 12 people sharing a building, developed a quality of attention that had not been there before. Like people who have been living in a place they assumed they would always have and have just been told the lease ends in 4 weeks and are now, for the first time, actually looking at it. Haru started finishing things. This was subtle enough that Izuku almost missed it, but once he noticed he couldn't unnotice it. Haru had always been productive, it was characteristic of him, the perpetual forward motion of someone who managed difficulty through task completion, but there had always been projects in progress, things begun and continued across weeks. Now he was finishing them. The renovation of the 3rd floor completed in 4 days that should have taken 2 weeks. The shelving system on the 2nd floor extended and fully realized. Every practical thing that had been ongoing closed out, wrapped up, made complete. Izuku sat with Haru on the 2nd floor one evening while he was finishing the last of the shelving and said, carefully, "You're wrapping things up." Haru set down the tool he was holding. "Yeah," he said. "I am." A pause. "Are you okay?" Izuku asked. Haru looked at the shelving. He ran one hand along the edge of it with the specific gesture of a craftsman assessing their own work, not admiring, assessing. Finding the measure of it. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the buildings I worked on. The ones I built." He paused. You build something and then other people live in it. You never know them. You never see what they do with the space you made. He paused. "I always thought that was fine. That was the work. You make the thing and you move on." He looked at Izuku. "I don't feel that way about this building. I don't feel that way about this building." Izuku looked at the shelves. At the careful, functional beauty of Haru's work, the specific intelligence of someone who builds things to hold rather than to impress. "Whatever happens in 4 weeks, Izuku said, this building stays." "You don't know that," Haru said. "No," Izuku agreed. "But I know that what it has been is real and finished and nobody can unbuild it." He paused. "That's what you're doing, I think. Not finishing things because you're afraid they won't exist later. Finishing them because they deserve to be finished." Haru was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah," he said. "That's it." He picked up the tool and went back to work. Izuku sat with him until it was done. In the 2nd week, Senri made contact. Not through the careful incremental visibility of the preceding months, the figures at windows, the shadows in Sora's drawings, the deliberate door left a fraction open. This contact was direct, which was its own kind of message about the changed timeline. A note. It appeared under the facility's door at 3 in the morning, on a night when Izuku happened to be awake at the workspace and Rei happened to be in her stillness on the ground floor and therefore present when it slid under the door with the quiet certainty of something that had been placed by someone who knew exactly where the gap was. Rei brought it upstairs. She knocked for the first time in weeks, which told Izuku before he opened the door that whatever she was carrying mattered. He read the note. It said, "The count in Musetafu reached 47 last night. 3 weeks remaining, likely less. The instruction from above has been revised. The facility is now a priority target, not an observation subject. The 4 in the building know this. They have not yet been authorized to act, but authorization is conditional on threshold progress and the condition will be met. There is a secondary matter. One of the 4 oldest is not what I have represented them to be. I was mistaken in my assessment that the parallel project was run by a single internal actor. There are 2 of us. The second one is not, I believe, aligned with what you are building. I do not yet know their agenda. I am working to understand it. Until I do, treat the information I carry with appropriate uncertainty. Meet me. Same location. 3 nights from now." Izuku read it twice. One of the 4 oldest is not what I have represented them to be. There are 2 of us. He sat with that for a long time. He showed it to Yuki in the morning. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she set it on the desk and looked at the wall. "It changes the analysis," she said. "How significantly?" "The parallel project I identified," she said slowly, "I attribute it entirely to one actor within the 4. One internal dissenter running a counterstructure." She paused. "If there are 2, the question is whether their agendas align or diverge." She paused. Senri says the second is not aligned with what we're building. Which means the second has a different counter, or is not running a counter at all, or is running something that looks like a counter from the outside but is actually something else entirely. A false counter, Izuku said. A possibility I hadn't modeled, Yuki said. Someone who appears to be building an alternative to the organization but is actually serving the organization's interests through a different mechanism. A honey trap, Izuku thought. Something that looks like an exit and is actually a different kind of entry. Are we the false counter or is Senri? He asked. Yuki looked at him. That's the question, she said. And we don't have enough information to answer it yet. She paused. Which is why the meeting matters. She picked up the note. Go. Ask the right questions. And take Daichi. I was going to. And take Nami too, she said. Nami? Senri is going to tell you something that will require numerical analysis to evaluate. She paused. Take someone who can run the numbers while you're still in the room. He looked at her. I'll take Nami, he said. The meeting was on Thursday. 3 of them again, Izuku, Daichi, and Nami. The same route through the Kamino district at the same hour, and yet completely different in quality, the city carrying, for Izuku, the specific weight of a place that had 4 weeks left to not know what was moving beneath it. The door was open when they arrived. Senri was in the same position as before, far wall, absolute stillness, the eyes with their old quality of light. But something was different tonight. The quality of the two-direction orientation that Daichi had described, the emotional signature of something pointing simultaneously at the organization and at something outside it, was more pronounced. More strained. You found the note, Senri said. 3 nights ago, Izuku said. Tell me about the second actor. A pause. The specific pause of something choosing exactly how much to say. I became aware of them 8 months ago, Senri said. After I had already begun the assembly, the 7 initial subjects, the conditions for your emergence as the convergence point. He paused. I noticed anomalies in the transformation record that didn't correspond to my own decisions. Subjects I hadn't chosen, appearing in the rollout at positions that served a different logic than mine. A different logic, Nami said. She had her notebook open. What kind of different? Mine was oriented toward the counterstructure, Senri said. Toward assembling the specific types and capabilities needed to reach Kurogane directly when it arrived. He paused. The second actor's logic appeared, at first, to serve the same end. Similar subject selection, similar positioning outside the standard rollout. He paused. But the subjects themselves were different in a way I couldn't immediately identify. What was the difference? Izuku asked. Mine chose, Senri said. All 8 of you, when offered the alternative, chose the facility over the Kamino building. The trajectory of each of you, once the conditions were established, moved toward choosing. He paused. The second actor's subjects don't choose. When they encounter the alternative, they hesitate. They delay. And then, consistently, they return to the Kamino building. They return, Izuku thought. They're designed to return. They're scouts, Nami said. Her pen was moving. They go out, find the alternative, assess it, and come back with information. That is my current assessment, Senri said. Yes. How many? Nami asked. 5, as far as I can identify. He paused. Possibly more. And among the 12 people in the facility? Izuku asked carefully. The question sat in the room. Senri was quiet for a long time. I don't know, it said finally. That is the honest answer. I cannot rule it out. Daichi had not spoken since they entered the building. He spoke now, quietly and with the weight of someone who has been receiving something for the duration of a conversation and is now delivering what they've received. The second actor, he said. It's in this building. Yes, Senri said. Which floor? Upper. One of the 3. Daichi looked at Izuku. I can narrow it down, he said. If I get close enough to the upper floor. The two-direction signature you described in Senri, it should be legible in the second actor too, but with a different quality. A different kind of 2 directions. He paused. I know what genuine conflict feels like. I know what performed conflict feels like. The difference is legible. Performed conflict, Izuku thought. The emotional signature of something pretending to be conflicted in order to appear aligned with what we're building while serving a different purpose. Not tonight, Izuku said. We don't have the conditions for a controlled approach to the upper floor tonight. He paused. But soon. He looked at Senri. The 5 subjects, he said. The ones designed to return. Do you believe any of them have already been in contact with the facility? Senri's eyes held his for a long moment. Yes, it said. I believe one of them is in your facility now. The room was very still. One of them is in the facility now, Izuku thought. 12 people. 11 of whom he trusted completely. One of whom was designed to return. Who? He kept his face still. He kept his breathing steady. He kept the question off his face, because whatever was watching from the upper floor of this building, whatever the second actor had in the facility, he did not want that information reaching it before he had time to think. Thank you, he said to Senri. For telling me. Be careful, Senri said. The second actor has been patient. But the threshold revision has changed the timeline for everyone, including them. Whatever they're going to do, they'll do it soon. Soon, Izuku thought. One more question, he said. Yes. Do you know what they want? The second actor. What their goal is? Senri was quiet for a moment. What Kurogane wants, it said finally, is the threshold. The moment of sufficient power. What I want is to prevent that moment. He paused. The second actor wants something different from both of us. He paused. They want you. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Me specifically, Izuku said. The facility, Senri said. What you've built. The 12 people and the principle of choice and the counterstructure that I designed the conditions for and that became something I didn't design. He paused. Someone wants to own that. Not destroy it. Own it. He paused. Which is, in some ways, more dangerous than destruction. Izuku stood in the dark of the Camino building's ground floor and felt the shape of the thing they were inside shift and expand, the walls of the situation moving outward to reveal a room that was larger than the one he had thought he was in. 3 threats, he thought. Not 2. Kurogane and the threshold. The organization's authorization to act against the facility after the threshold. And a third actor who wants to own what we've built. 3 weeks. We're done for tonight, he said. They left. On the walk back, Daichi said nothing for 6 blocks. Then he said. You're not going to tell them immediately. No, Izuku said. Why? Because if one of the 12 is designed to return, they will report whatever I say in the gathering. He paused. I need to know who it is before I say anything that matters in a room with all 12 present. How do you find out? The same way we find everything out, Izuku said. We pay sufficient attention. Nami, who had been walking with her notebook still open, said. I have a methodology. Both of them looked at her. The 5 subjects Senri described, she said. They were assembled by the second actor using a different logic than Senri's. She paused. I can reverse engineer the selection logic from the transformation timeline and the type distribution. She paused. It will take time I don't have, but I can narrow the pool significantly. How significantly? Izuku asked. From 12 to 3 or 4, she said. Within 48 hours. Do it, Izuku said. She closed her notebook. They walked through the Camino district in silence, back toward the facility, and the city was as indifferent as it had always been, and the 3 weeks ahead sat on Izuku's shoulders with a weight that was different from everything that had come before, not heavier, exactly, but more specific. More shapely. The weight of something that had moved from the general category of threat approaching to the particular category of threat with a face, a timeline, and a name. Someone wants to own what we've built, he thought. Not while I'm building it. Chapter 22, The Question of Trust. 48 hours. Izuku spent most of them in a state of observation that was the most focused he had maintained in the facility, which was significant, because his baseline level of observation of the 12 people in his building had always been high. Now it was total. He was not looking for guilt. He had learned, in months of this work, that guilt was not the most legible emotion in the transformed. The sensory amplification that most of them experienced made emotional concealment more difficult, but it also made the management of displayed emotion more practiced. Someone designed to return would not be betraying themselves through guilt. They might not experience guilt at all, if what Senri had described was accurate, if the return was not a choice but a design, an orientation built into them from the moment of their transformation. They don't choose, Senri had said. When they encounter the alternative, they hesitate. They delay. And then, consistently, they return. What does hesitation look like in someone who has been in the facility for weeks? He looked at the 12 of them and tried to find it. Nami came to him on the morning of the second day. She had the look she wore when the numbers had arrived at something definitive, the specific quality of a person who has found the discrepancy and is now carrying it. She sat across from him at the desk and opened her notebook to a page dense with notation. 3 candidates, she said. Tell me. The selection logic Senri described, subjects oriented toward choosing, has a specific signature in the transformation timeline. She pointed to the page. The timing, the type, the specific way each person arrived at the facility. The genuine choices have a pattern. He paused. 3 of the 12 deviate from that pattern in ways that are consistent with the second actor's selection logic. Who? Izuku asked. She met his eyes. Ren, she said. Mira. And, she paused. Aiko. Izuku looked at the names. Ren, he thought. Found by Kenji in the basement of an abandoned building, 3 weeks on the streets, barely managing. Exhausted, genuine, grateful. Mira, he thought. Left the Camino building. Brought us the information about assimilation or elimination. Described in accurate detail by the organization as stubborn and relentless. Aiko, he thought. Knocked on the door. Brought her research. Has been working with Yuki for weeks on the cellular analysis. He sat with the 3 names. How confident are you? He asked. In the methodology? Very. In the individual identification? He paused. 70 to 80%. The methodology can narrow the pool, but it can't identify with certainty. He paused. The deviation from pattern could have other explanations for any individual case. Mira, Izuku said. She brought us information from inside the Camino building. The assimilation or elimination directive. If she's the scout, then the information was accurate enough to be credible but selected to direct our responses in a specific direction, Nami said. That's how a well-designed intelligence operation works. You give enough true information to establish trust. He paused. Doesn't mean all of it was true. Which part might not be? Nami was quiet for a moment. The timeline, she said. The 4-week window. We recalibrated everything around 4 weeks. He paused. What if the actual timeline is different, and we were given the 4-week frame to create urgency and pressure that serves the second actor's purposes? Izuku looked at the wall. 4 weeks, he thought. Everything reorganized around 4 weeks. The building's atmosphere changed, the preparations shifted, the quality of the group altered by the knowledge that the horizon was close. What if the horizon is in a different place? Or, he said slowly, the 4 weeks is accurate, and one of the 3 is a genuine defector, and the selection logic methodology is identifying the deviation that comes from having been in the Camino building rather than the deviation that comes from being designed to return. Also possible, Nami said. Which is why I said 70 to 80%. He looked at the names again. Ren. Mira. Aiko. One of them, possibly. Or none of them. Or something more complicated than either. Don't tell anyone else, he said. Obviously, Nami said. Not even Yuki. Nami looked at him. Yuki is going to figure it out independently within a week regardless of whether I tell her, she said. I know, Izuku said. When she does, I'll talk to her. But I want to talk to each of the 3 first. How? The way I talk to everyone, Izuku said. Honestly. Directly. Without pretending I don't suspect what I suspect. Nami looked at him for a long moment. That's either a very brave methodology or a very dangerous one. Probably both, Izuku said. That seems to be a theme. He talked to Ren first. He found him on the 2nd floor in the space that had become, informally, his, the corner with the elevated window, the one Sora used sometimes when the building felt small, which Ren had taken to sharing with her in the evenings in the specific way of 2 people who have independently arrived at the same need for a particular quality of light and distance. He was alone now. Looking out the window with the composed steadiness that had replaced his early exhaustion over the weeks. Izuku sat beside him. Can I ask you something directly? He said. Ren looked at him. You're always direct. More direct than usual. A pause. Okay. Before Kenji found you in that basement, Izuku said, were you in the Camino building? The quality of stillness in Ren's body changed. Not dramatically. A small shift, the kind that people who have practiced stillness produce when something unexpected arrives. Yes, he said. Izuku waited. For 4 days, Ren said. At the beginning. When I first transformed. He paused. Someone found me before I understood what was happening. Brought me there. I stayed for 4 days and then I left. Why did you leave? Ren looked at the window. Because it was wrong, he said. The way it felt in there. The way everyone was the same direction, pointing at the same thing. He paused. I grew up with a father who needed everyone in the house to want what he wanted. He paused. I recognized it. I recognized it, Izuku thought. He looked at Ren and thought about the quality of his arrival, the exhaustion, the 3 weeks of managing alone, the specific rawness of someone who has been holding something back for a long time. He thought about what Senri had said: when they encounter the alternative, they hesitate, they delay, and then consistently they return. Ren didn't return. Ren left, and then he managed alone for 3 weeks, and then Kenji found him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because I was afraid," Ren said simply. "That you'd see it as a reason not to trust me." He paused. "I didn't know how to say I'd been inside it and chosen to leave without it sounding like the opposite of what it was." Izuku looked at him. The opposite of what it was. Someone who was inside and left is not the same as someone who was inside and is designed to return. "Thank you for telling me," he said. Ren turned from the window and met his eyes. "Is there something I should know?" he asked. "Yes," Izuku said. "But I'm not ready to tell the group yet. When I am, you'll hear it with everyone else." Ren nodded. He turned back to the window. "Izuku," he said. "Yeah. Whatever you're carrying about this," he said. "About not knowing who to trust." He paused. "I understand it. I've been carrying it too, since the beginning." He paused. "I think most of us have. Trust is a daily practice," Izuku thought. Not a settled condition but a choice made repeatedly, in the face of incomplete information, because the alternative is a kind of isolation that costs more than the risk. "Yeah," he said. "I think most of us have." He talked to Aiko on Tuesday. She was in the workspace with Yuki when he arrived, which meant the conversation happened in front of Yuki, which was not what he had planned. But Yuki looked up when he came in and read something in his face with the precision she brought to reading everything and said, without ceremony, "You're going to ask her if she was in the Camino building." Izuku looked at her. "I've been running the same analysis as Nami," Yuki said. "I finished this morning." She paused. "She's on my list too." Aiko had stopped what she was doing. She was looking between Yuki and Izuku with the expression of a scientist encountering data that requires the revision of a working hypothesis, not defensiveness, recalibration. "I was not in the Camino building," she said. "I was transformed 11 days before I came here, and for those 11 days I was in my apartment trying to understand what had happened to me." She paused. "I did not encounter anyone from the organization during that period." "Then why does the selection logic show deviation from pattern?" Yuki asked. "Because the pattern you're using is incomplete," Aiko said. She turned to the notebook in front of her and flipped to a page. "The transformation timeline analysis assumes that the cellular mechanism of the transformation is identical across all subjects." She paused. "It's not. There are at least 3 distinct cellular pathways, and they produce different temporal signatures in the early post-transformation period." She paused. "My pathway produces a signature that looks, in a timeline analysis, like a delay. Like hesitation. But it's not behavioral, it's biological." Yuki looked at the notebook. She read for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Oh. The analysis has a false positive rate for anyone who transformed through the 3rd cellular pathway," Aiko said. "Approximately 30% of transformations use that pathway." She paused. "I was one of them." Izuku looked at Yuki. Yuki was still reading. Her expression had the specific quality it wore when she was revising something significant, not embarrassment exactly, but the focused intensity of someone correcting their own error with the same rigor they would apply to anyone else's. "The methodology needs to account for pathway variation," she said. "Yes," Aiko said. "Which reduces the pool further," Yuki said. "Or eliminates it," Aiko said. "Depending on the pathway distribution and the remaining candidates." Izuku looked between them. "Which candidates remain after the pathway correction?" he asked. Yuki closed the notebook. "1, she said. She looked at Izuku. He already knew. Mira, he thought. He talked to Mira that evening. He found her alone, which was where she was most often. She had integrated into the group's rhythms with the smooth efficiency of someone who knew how groups worked and was good at moving within them, but she spent her evenings alone in the small room she had been given, and the aloneness had not seemed like isolation. It had seemed, until now, like the natural pattern of someone still orienting to a new place. Now it seemed like something else. He knocked. She opened the door. She looked at him with the clear, direct gaze she had brought to every interaction since she arrived, and in it he found nothing he could definitively call false. Which was either because she was genuine or because she was very good. A well-designed intelligence operation gives enough true information to establish trust. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Yes," she said. He came in. He sat in the chair. She sat on the edge of the cot. The room had the quality of a space still in the process of being inhabited. She had not put things on the walls, had not arranged the furniture in a way that expressed preference. Everything was where it had been placed when the room was prepared. She's kept it ready to leave, Izuku thought. Whether consciously or not. He decided to be what he was. I need to ask you something, he said. And I need you to understand that however you answer, you're not in danger here. I'm not going to hurt you or ask you to leave. What I need is the truth. She looked at him. Okay, she said. When you left the Camino building, he said. Did you leave alone? A pause. Longer than the other pauses in this conversation. No, she said. He waited. Someone told me to go, she said. One of the older ones. They told me where this facility was and what to bring, the assimilation or elimination information, and they told me to integrate and observe and report. The room was very quiet. Someone told me to go. Which of the four? Izuku asked. I don't know their name, she said. They spoke to me alone. Not Senri, I know that. The quality was different. Are you reporting? Izuku asked, have you been reporting? Another pause. I was, she said. For the first week. Then I stopped. Why? She looked at her hands. Because what I found here, she said, was not what I was sent to find. She paused. I was told I would find a hero project. An institutional operation dressed up as something personal. Someone managing the transformed as a resource. She paused. That's not what this is. What is it? She looked up at him. You know what it is, she said. You built it. He sat with that for a moment. The week you stopped reporting, he said. Did you send a final report before you stopped? Yes. What did it contain? The basic facts, she said. The count, the types, the structure. The information I'd gathered up to that point. Which means the second actor knows everything from the first week, Izuku thought. The count, the types, the structure. They know we're 12. They know our capabilities. But they don't know what we know. They don't know Yuki's analysis. They don't know about Senri. They don't know we've made contact with the counter inside the Camino building. Thank you for telling me, he said. She looked at him with something in her face that had been in it since the beginning and that he now read differently than he had before, not the complexity of someone comparing two places, but the complexity of someone who has been two things simultaneously and is, for the first time, in the presence of someone who knows both. Are you going to tell the others? She asked. Yes, he said. Tonight. She nodded. She was quiet for a moment. I want to stay, she said. I know, Izuku said. Do you believe me? He looked at her. He thought about what Daichi had said, months ago, about trust. Not trustworthy or untrustworthy as settled categories. Useful, but not unconditional. The alignment of interests, clearly understood. I believe that what you found here changed what you wanted, he said. And I believe that the change is real. He paused. I also believe that the second actor knows things about this facility that give them an advantage I need to account for. He paused. Both of those things are true simultaneously. She looked at him for a long moment. That's fair, she said. Yes, Izuku said. It is. He went to gather everyone.